Chapter 1643. Jiang Pingji had been in the north for more than a decade. She celebrated the new year according to the customs of the north. This was the first time she had returned to the south. The new year in the south was very different, not only in terms of customs, but also in the environment. The snow in the north had always been thick, but it was not too cold around the new year. It was different in the south. The snow was not thick, but the air was chilly. It was during the war, so the atmosphere was not strong. The streets and alleys were almost empty. Half a month before the new year, Jiang Pingji led people to visit everywhere secretly. She was only relieved when she was sure that the people had been properly settled down. There were many people in the world who obeyed on the surface but disobeyed on the inside. That was why there were scandals of poor supervision and poor implementation. It was not possible even in the future interstellar with the information explosion, let alone in ancient times when communication was extremely inconvenient. The people under her command did not take the people seriously, nor did they take her orders seriously. It was normal for the winter clothes and food to be embezzled and embezzled. Therefore, Jiang Pingji's hands were stained with blood during this trip. She killed along the way, so the local officials spent the new year in fear. They were afraid that Jiang Pingji was secretly watching them. Who knew where she came from? Those who committed lesser crimes were reprimanded from top to bottom. None of the people involved could escape. Those who committed more serious crimes and embezzled more than the standards set by Jiang Pingji were merciful. Of course, it was not that she did not promote people along the way. Corrupt people were hateful and deserved to be killed, but those who did their duty well and even exceeded their quota should be rewarded and encouraged. She recorded the people and things she saw along the way in her mind's account book. Some people should be promoted. It was a waste of talent to stay in their original positions. Some people did not have enough experience. They needed to be honed for a year or two before being promoted. Some people were not as good as the top but were better than the bottom. Rewards were enough. The snow outside is melting. Why is my lord dressed so lightly? Wei Ci did not follow Jiang Pingji everywhere. He stayed to deal with the trifles of the new year. Even if he wanted to follow, Jiang Pingji would not allow it. After all, Wei Ci did not have a strong body like hers. If he ran around for a month in the cold season, he would definitely fall ill. I'm not afraid of the cold. Jiang Pingji untied the rope of her straw cape with one hand and threw the name list on the bamboo slip to Wei Ci. The paper was light, but it had its drawbacks. If it got soaked in the rain, the ink would scatter. For convenience, Jiang Pingji used a bamboo slip to record and a penknife to carve. Even if the bamboo slip was damp, the words on it could still be preserved for a long time. It was enough for her to bring it back for Wei Ci and the rest to copy. Wei Ci opened the bamboo slip. The first dozen or so names were all killed by the Lord, and each name was followed by the crime of being killed. The 20 or so names in the middle were reprimanded or demoted, and the last 10 or so names were praised or promoted. Remember the people behind you for this year's new year. Yes, sir. The files of those who were punished or killed are still on the way. It's a long journey, so it'll probably take 2 days to get there. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, in order to come back as soon as possible to spend the new year with you, I've shortened the journey time again. Do you feel touched? Wei Ci sighed. I want to be touched, but there are too many things to do this year. I have the heart but not the strength. Every new year, important officials would receive generous rewards. It was a kind of year-end bonus. Officials who had worked hard and performed well in the previous year would also receive it. Other than the important officials, who were personally reviewed by Jiang Pingji, the rest were arranged by her subordinates. In the past, Dongqing, which was a fraction of the later, had a small territory and few officials. It was naturally relaxed during the new year. Now that it controlled Dongqing, the northern borderline, and Nanxing, it had expanded in scale. The New Year's gifts had to be prepared long in advance and sent to various places. In her previous life, Her Majesty did not start this habit until she ascended the throne. From her ascension to the throne until the year of Long Yubin, it had lasted for a whole 18 years. No matter how fierce the battle in the court was, the lower levels of officialdom were still relatively clean. Now, it had started early. There was Wei Si's admonition and the enlightenment of the idle people. Even if it was an insignificant year-end bonus, the person who received the reward would be greatly encouraged. At the same time, it could also be used as a warning to those who did not receive the gifts. The types of gifts were relatively simple, such as a set of ink, a knife of paper, a piece of cloth. It didn't matter if there were too many or too few gifts, or if the gifts were too light or too heavy. What mattered was the meaning behind the gifts. This was not only to win over the hearts of the people, but it was also a warning to the many supervising officials. It was to make them constantly alert and not slack off. Especially when they knew that Jiang Pingji would spend a month at the end of the year inspecting the grassroots, they did not dare to be careless. To be able to receive a gift meant that they had done well in the previous year. This killer was very satisfied and they did not have to worry about losing their lives during the new year. As for those who did not receive it, they were naturally trembling with fear, afraid that disaster would befall them one day. After so many years, except for Nanxing and Nanxing who did not know the rules, everyone in Dongqing understood her temperament. Towards those who were derelict in their duties and corruption, she would kill them without batting an eyelid. As long as they were dutiful and diligent in their duties, she was also a magnanimous and benevolent ruler. Every new year, the people would be surprised to find that these parents and officials became extraordinarily hardworking. Their performance in government affairs rose steadily and their efficiency was extremely high. For example, among the New Year's letters sent this year, there was a very interesting content. A small county magistrate who was mediocre but had been in a remote and desolate village for 23 years complained that his old mother was getting on in years. She happened to hear about foreign Chong peaches and really wanted to eat them. Even if she could not eat them, it would be good to see them. He also wanted to buy half a caddy for his old mother, but the small county in the 81st level didn't have it and the price of buying it on behalf of others was too expensive. Jiang Pingji felt that this request was not too much. This minor official's performance in the previous year was not bad and he had a good reputation in the local area. Therefore, the New Year's gift was changed from a knife of paper and 2 ingots of ink to a caddy of peeled Chong peaches. Not to mention how frightened and surprised the minor official would be when he received the Chong peaches, Jiang Pingji was busy until the morning of New Year's Eve before she stopped writing. There were wars everywhere this year. During the winter, she even allocated funds to save millions of people in Jinan and Nanxing. If it was not for the fact that the Nan family had assassinated 7 noble families in Fenzhou and enriched their private coffers, her wallet would have been empty. The New Year's banquet was not as elaborate and grand as the previous years. It was more like an ordinary family banquet. Everyone gathered for a meal and summarized their performance in the previous year. Compared to her low-key side, and Chui on the other side was very arrogant. Hua Yuan could hear Chui's laughter from afar. He adjusted the expression on his face and revealed just the right amount of puzzlement. He smiled and entered the main tent. I wonder what happy event has made my lord so happy. The bashful Xichang princess was kneeling next to Chui. His large palm held the princess's soft hand and he kept rubbing it with emotion. The heavens have not ended my heir. And Chui's eyes reddened as he spoke. Although he said that the princess of Xichang was just a plaything and did not have the right to give birth to a young master for him, he was still very happy that she was really pregnant. Chapter 1644. Congratulations, my lord. Congratulations, my lord. Hua Yuan bowed with his hands folded. His sincere expression darkened the Xichang imperial concubine's eyes. She grew even more wary. She subconsciously rubbed her flat belly and couldn't help but sigh. She was both happy and sad. She was happy that she was pregnant. Her treatment would be several levels higher. No matter how much Enchui looked down on her, he would not mistreat the child in her belly. She was sad that she was the imperial concubine of a nation. The first half of her life had been doted on by her father and mother. She had enjoyed all the riches in the world. But in the second half of her life, her country had fallen. She was homeless and had even been treated as a slave by a small feudal lord. She had no control over her children. She had once despised the women in the harem who used their beauty to please men. She had never thought she would be worse than them. The Xichang imperial concubine was not old, but she was very shrewd. Even though she was filled with sorrow, she still wore a gentle and elegant smile on her face. She knelt behind Enchui. Those who did not know would think she was Enchui's legal wife. Hua Yuan's congratulations were very ordinary, but Enchui beamed. He valued Hua Yuan even more now. I should be the one thanking you. That divine doctor is skilled and virtuous. He is truly a divine physician. Enchui couldn't help but grab Hua Yuan's hand. He patted it as he sighed. Perhaps because he had resolved a matter, he looked radiant. He seemed several years younger. Hua Qing, you have to thank that divine doctor for me. When Lin is born, he will reward you greatly. If not for Hua Yuan's recommendation, Enchui would not have been able to cure his illness and have his own child. In terms of merit, the Xichang imperial concubine who had given birth was only second. Hua Yuan was without a doubt the first. Yes. Only the heavens knew what kind of willpower Hua Yuan had to deal with Enchui without batting an eyelid. He wanted to tell the unlucky Enchui that he could not give him the merit. After all, it was the Xichang prince who had worked hard. After Hua Yuan left, Enchui reminded the Xichang imperial concubine again. The child is still young. You have to take care of yourself. When Lin is born, you will not be treated unfairly. The imperial concubine felt very disgusted, but she had to show a shy and happy smile. I understand. I will definitely give birth to a healthy child for you. Enchui was very satisfied. He planned to spread this news so that everyone would feel happy as well. The news of Xichang's princess concubine's pregnancy quickly spread. The officials all congratulated her, and she was so happy that she could only see her teeth but not her eyes. This new year was the most comfortable new year since the disaster of the southern barbarians. Apart from a select few, the other officials did not know that Enchui had an unmentionable illness. Those in the know included the old officials who had fought alongside Enchui in the early years, such as the Target brothers he had sworn to when he was a member of the Red Lotus group in Dongqing. Speaking of these two sworn brothers, he sighed. Enchui had been able to call them brothers when he was down and out. Later on, when he returned to Nanqing and started his own business, the aristocratic ways in his bones had completely separated him from his two sworn brothers. The two sworn brothers had martial prowess and were not afraid of death. In the early years, when Enchui had no men and no land, they were indeed the trump cards that Enchui could bring out. The present was different from the past. Was Enchui still the stray dog of the past? He was now the vassal of Nanqing, Enchui. The two sworn brothers were born in the wilderness and were illiterate. They spoke rudely and acted rashly. Enchui, on the other hand, was a famous aristocrat who had enjoyed all the glory, splendor, and wealth. The three of them did not grow up in the same environment at all. They did not share the same view of the world. However, Enchui did not want others to say that he was an ingrate who shared hardships but did not share hardships. Even though the two sworn brothers had fallen behind for many years, he did not abandon them. Instead, he gave them a place to retire and allowed them to live a life where they did not have to worry about food and water, and Chui felt that he had done his best, but the two sworn brothers did not feel good about it. They thought that they were very important, but as Chui climbed to a high position, or as he recovered the glory that he once had, they seemed out of place. They had been marginalized by Chui all these years. One of them had even been demoted again and again because he did not do a good job in supervising the rations. Now, he was just a bald general. Calling him a general was just a nice way to put it. In reality, he was not even as good as an ordinary centurion. And Chui was overjoyed. They only had the right to be in the background because of their past hardships. When the crowd of congratulatory people had left, the two sworn brothers finally had a chance to say a few words to Chui. One of them was more straightforward. With a hesitant expression, he said, "Big brother, isn't your body? Why does sister-in-law have?" Before he could finish, Chui's face turned completely black. The other sworn brother interrupted him with an awkward smile. "Congratulations, big brother. When sister-in-law is pregnant, I will congratulate big brother again. I suddenly remembered that I still have things to do in the camp. I will take my leave first." With that, he dragged his sworn brother away without a word. If he did not leave, did he want to be killed by Chui in a rage? Did he not see that Chui's face was so black that it was almost green? Men could not stand the humiliation of being cuckolded, much less being questioned by a sworn brother. "My good brother, why are you dragging me away? If I don't drag you away, do you want to drag me to death? How did I drag you down? Big brother obviously cured his body and that's why sister-in-law is pregnant. Yet you're questioning whether his hidden illness has been cured. Aren't you suspecting that the baby in sister-in-law's womb belongs to another man?" He was almost at his wit's end. After so many years, did he still not know how to be more cautious? As they followed Chui, they became more aware of what it meant to be powerless. It wasn't that they were not brave enough when it came to killing their enemies. It was just that brute strength did not allow one to climb higher in this world. To make an analogy, when Chui had just started his business, of course, he prioritized profits. He rushed for sales and income. It was fine for his subordinates to be a group of undergraduates. But when his business expanded and he wanted to expand his business, it was inevitable that he would choose to transform and pay more attention to product quality and the capabilities of the company's personnel. The two sworn brothers were undergraduates. If they wanted to keep up with the pace and not be eliminated, they had to work hard to enrich themselves. They had to work hard to make their abilities catch up with the elites from prestigious universities. Otherwise, what awaited them was elimination. Speaking of which, Dian Yen, who worked under Jiang Pingji, was a typical example. He was a hard-working person who kept learning and kept up with the pace. Dian Yen was lucky. Jiang Pingji, the Lord, gave him directions at the right time. Yang Si, the think tank, was stationed with him in Hu County for 2 to 3 years and gave him special lessons from time to time. Dian Yen learned with difficulty at first, but he also climbed up after much hardship. On the other hand, the two of them were not so lucky. And Chui did not have the patience. He did not think that their hard work would be very effective. His other colleagues also looked down on their background and abilities. They were unwilling to pay attention to these two uncouth people, let alone give them pointers. They could still stay in the Chui group as a customer service and janitor. They could earn a living because of Chui's kindness. Chapter 1645. Actually, for the two of them, being a customer service, security guard, or janitor was nothing. No matter what, it was better than squatting in a village and showing off their strength to survive. However, it was difficult to balance it out. And Shui used to be attentive and concerned to them, calling them brothers and thinking highly of them. But now, he didn't need them anymore. From being in Shui's right and left arms and confidants, they were reduced to the background, idlers who did chores. This wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the people who used to suck up to them were now stepping on them. Their days were getting more and more depressing. With such a huge difference, it would be strange if they felt good. But they couldn't complain, lest Shui heard about it. They only had a little bit of friendship left with Shui. If they lost even this, they would probably be beaten back to their original state. Sigh. Let's not talk about these unhappy things. We haven't had a drink together in a long time. He patted the shoulder of his brother and sighed. Sister-in-law warmed the food and wine at home. We're going to drink to our heart's content tonight. Let's go. Both of them were sad people, so they agreed to get drunk together. Unexpectedly, they ran into Lu Jing, who had lost a lot of weight and was about to return home. The brothers' eyes brightened. One of them called out to Lu Jing. Military advisor Lu, where are you going? Lu Zhang's situation wasn't much better than the two brothers. The latter saw it and remembered it. Lu Zhang had sacrificed a lot for Shui. The first 2 years were even more difficult. Who knew how much energy and effort it took to slowly open Shui's shop, allowing him to enjoy the glory he had today. Now that Hua Yuan, who was more to Shui's liking, had appeared, Lu Jing, the strategist with whom he didn't share the same values, was slowly buried and marginalized. To be honest, Lu Jing was one of the few people in Shui's camp who was willing to look the two brothers in the eye. Thus, they were extremely respectful to Lu Jing. They would greet him and say a few words when they met on the road. Lu Jing turned his head and said calmly, "So it's you two generals. I went to congratulate my lord earlier. I'm on my way home to stay up for the new year." Even though there weren't many people in Lu Zhang's house, staying up for the new year was an old tradition. The two brothers looked at each other, cupped their fists, and invited, "We are also alone outside, and it's boring to stay up all year round. Why don't you join us, military advisor?" Lu Zhang nodded in agreement. Festivals like the Chinese New Year should have some popularity, and the more people, the merrier. The two brothers happily led the way. After a few turns, they arrived home. The house was brightly lit, and a beautiful woman had been waiting outside for a long time. "Madam, go and prepare some good wine and dishes. We must drink to our heart's content with the military counselor and the others tonight." The woman nodded and led the two maids to bring out the wine and delicacies that had been kept warm. After eating 2 mouthfuls of food, her sworn brother said, "Sister-in-law's cooking is amazing. I haven't had such delicious food in a long time." The two brothers boasted about their business. Lu Jing sat at the side and listened quietly. He did not speak for a long time. He had met that madam once. It was said that she was originally the wife of a small aristocratic family. Because of the chaos of the war, she was separated from her family when they migrated. She fell into the hands of the southern barbarians and was tied to the back of a horse as a spoil of war. Whether it was luck or misfortune, the southern barbarians were about to take their spoils of war away to enjoy when they ran into the troops of Shui's tent. At that time, Shui's career had just started. The two sworn brothers were the most useful generals under his tent. The sworn brother killed the southern barbarian bandits and saved this concubine's daughter. He immediately saw her and brought her back to his tent without a word. From Lu Zhang's point of view, this kind of forced buying and selling was essentially no different from the southern barbarian bandits. Weren't they all bandits? But this madam had accepted her fate, so Lu Zhang could not say anything. He did not like this world. Whether it was men or women, they were all pitiful and weak in the face of evil bandits who took things by force. In the end, they had to accept their fate and treat the other party as heaven and earth. It was truly laughable. Lu Zheng was not a talkative person, so the two brothers did not think there was anything wrong with him. After 3 rounds of wine, their faces were red, and they began to speak with a lisp. Their voices sounded slurred, and they did not control their mouths. Lu Zheng listened and sighed inwardly. No wonder Enchui was at odds with these two brothers. Secrets could not be kept. Once they drank, they dared to say anything. As time went on, a narrow-minded person like Enchui would naturally have disagreements. The two were discussing Enchui's inability to have children due to her unmentionable illness, each saying something about how the other had gotten pregnant. Not only did Enchui disagree with them, but Lu Jing also felt uncomfortable listening to them. If the salted fishes were here, they would know why. Because the words of these two brothers were stabbing straight at the G-spot of a straight man. It would be strange if Lu Jing, who had normal values, could feel comfortable listening to them. After listening for a while, Lu Jing used the excuse of sobering up to go out to the veranda to look at the snow. The sounds in the room faded away behind him. It's snowing. The bright moon poured down cold light, dispersing the tipsiness on Lu Zhang's body. His swollen mind calmed down again. He had a question in his heart. This question was the same as the two people in the room. How did Enchui have a child? How did the child come so coincidentally? Seeing Enchui so happy all day, it did not seem fake. Although he was confused, he did not say it out loud like a boor. Lu Jing still cherished his life. If he angered Enchui's murderous intent because of this, wouldn't he die an unjust death? No matter how imaginative he was, he did not expect Hua Yuan to play such a trick. On the surface, he was plotting for Enchui, but behind his back, he wanted to kill Enchui. Moreover, he did not expect Hua Yuan to arrange for the sewing opportunity to be the elder brother of the Xichang princess. Those with more upright thoughts would not immediately think of something that went against human relations, unless it was someone as observant as Jiang Pingji or someone as schizophrenic as Hua Yuan. As he thought about it, Lu Jing heard the crunching sound of wooden clogs stepping on the snow. A delicate fragrance wafted into his nose. "Sir." A gentle female voice carried a watery warmth. The lady walked over gracefully and put down a cup of soup to sober up. Lu Jing declined politely. "I haven't had much to drink, so I won't trouble you." He was not a single person. He could understand women's hints. When dealing with married women, it was right to keep a respectful distance. "Sir, don't be nervous. Lang Jun and third brother are drinking in the room. The two of them are drunk and don't know what's going on here." The lady laughed. Seeing that Lu Zhang was still keeping a respectful distance, she said warmly, "Sir, please don't misunderstand me." The lady secretly looked around the room. Suddenly, she poured the warm soup on Lu Zhang. She raised her voice and kept apologizing to Lu Zhang. Lu Zhang's face darkened. He raised his hand and brushed away the lady's action of wiping him with a handkerchief. He looked angry. "I'm sorry. There are still clothes to change in the residence. Why don't you come to the guest house and change? I'll arrange for a servant to send you away." Lu Zhang did not say anything. He closed his eyes and hid his thoughts. Chapter 1646. What does Madam want to do? Just say it. Why beat around the bush and arouse suspicion? Several guesses floated through Lu Zhang's mind during the short distance from the main yard to the guest yard. Finally, he was sure that she wanted something from him. Lu Zhang didn't think that a woman he had only met once or twice would fall in love with him, especially since this madam had experienced too much. But she was still living peacefully. Naturally, she was an intelligent woman with a sharp mind. She couldn't be unaware of her husband's temperament. and Chui's two sworn brothers were boorish men who were illiterate to begin with. They had all the strength in their bodies, but not the slightest literary knowledge. To put it bluntly, they were bandits who didn't know what etiquette was. The worst side of men was vividly displayed in them. Whenever they saw a good-looking married woman, they would forcefully take her, never thinking that their behavior was wrong. Their logic was also quite interesting. Because the married woman was the spoils of war of the southern barbarians, they had saved this spoils of war from the southern barbarians. Therefore, they had the right to decide the spoils of war. Whether they forcefully took her or bestowed it to someone else, it was a matter of course. Lu Jing thought that this logic was wrong, but it was precisely the law of chaotic times. The strong had the right to freely distribute resources. Ants didn't have the right to be free. However, although they were ants, they also had the right to struggle. As soon as Lu Jing finished speaking, the two entered the guest yard. The madam turned around and bowed to him. "Madam, are you forcing me?" Was she trying to force a duck onto a perch, or was this moral coercion? "I do have a request. But I have no intention of forcing you." Lu Jing frowned slightly. He wasn't afraid of trouble, but he wouldn't accept anyone's trouble. It wasn't like he was overflowing with kindness and had nowhere to vent it. "Madam, why don't you tell me first? If I can help, I will naturally help. If not, you don't have to make this trip." Lu Jing didn't say anything definite, which could be considered as giving her a glimmer of hope. She waved her hand at the door that separated the outer and inner rooms of the guest courtyard. The simple door was opened, revealing a shy face. Lu Jing furrowed his brows and took a look. With his sharp eyes, he discovered that the handsome manservant with a red face and white teeth was a girl. She was not tall and her body was very skinny. Only her face was extremely beautiful. If she was properly nourished and her facial features developed, she would definitely be a beauty that could topple cities. "Madam, this is, come here, quickly greet the teacher." The madam waved at the child and pulled him. "To tell you the truth, this child was born from my late husband and me." Back then, during the disaster of the southern barbarians, my late husband's family migrated, but they encountered an accident and unfortunately died. In order to avoid disaster, this servant had no choice but to hide the child and lead the southern barbarian bandits away by myself. Later I met this person. This servant then brought the child back. It's just that he's a very hot-tempered person. Whenever there's even the slightest sign of trouble, he'll get angry. Your servant had no choice but to lie and say that the child is my niece's son. In order to keep the blood of her mother's family, she wanted to keep them by her side so that they could eat. In the past few years, she was fine, but as the child grew older, her face became like this servant's. Recently, it has become even more so. Therefore, I had no choice but to find a way out for her. Lu Jing was very smart. He knew what the madam had encountered the moment he heard this. A trace of disgust flashed in the depths of his eyes. According to the madam, when her husband had just met with misfortune in the morning, she had been abducted by the southern barbarians. Halfway through, she had been rescued by Chui's sworn brother, who had forcefully brought her back to his tent. In the face of these encounters, she had persevered and survived to raise her daughter. She had never expected that her daughter's appearance, which had inherited her and her late husband's merits, was even better than her own. As she grew older, Chui's sworn brother had actually taken a liking to her. "How old is she?" The madam said. "She's already in her golden years." 12. Lu Jing was very shocked. The skinny girl in front of him looked at most 9 or 10 years old. Looking at her skinny appearance, her eyes seemed especially large, and her hair was yellow and sparse. However, beauty was in her bones, not in her skin. Even so, she was still outstanding. The madam smiled bitterly and said, 2 years ago, when he saw this child, he had designs on her. However, he was too young and immature, so he didn't make a move. My late husband only had this little bit of flesh and blood left. How could he make her come this far? For the past 2 years, he could only think of ways to treat her harshly. She lacked clothes and food. If not for his reluctance, he might have even disfigured her. Mother and daughter are connected by heart. How could I have wanted this? Lu Jing said, what do you plan to do? The madam said, please take her, sir. Lu Jing almost choked on his own saliva. The madam's words were too ambiguous. The madam also knew that she had said something wrong. She explained, I know that sir already has a family. If you are interested, you can take her as a concubine. If you are kind, you can take her as your adopted daughter. In the future, her marriage will depend on her luck. She won't be a hindrance to sir. Lu Jing said, Madam, you really think highly of me. The madam said, after seeing that beast's evil heart, no matter how bad sir is, he's still better than him. The more time passed, the more flustered she became. Today, Lu Jing came to visit, so she couldn't care so much. If she missed Lu Jing, her daughter's future would really be ruined. Lu Jing thought about it again and finally agreed to help. He took the opportunity when Enchui's sworn brother was drunk to say that he had his eyes on one of the servants in his residence and wanted to take one. In this era, giving each other concubines was a good thing to say, let alone taking a servant. The other party was very drunk and agreed in a daze. When Lu Jing left, the girl turned to look at the madam, but the corners of her eyes were filled with doubt and hatred. What's your name? Lu Jing threw his cloak to her to protect her from the wind and cold. This servant's surname is Kang, and my nickname is Shintong. Lu Jing asked, do you know your mother's intentions? He noticed that the girl's straw sandals were broken, and her exposed toes were blue from the cold. Her hands were also frostbitten, and her little face was purple from the wind. As intelligent as he was, he naturally saw the hatred in the girl's eyes. It also made him feel frightened. That hatred was about to materialize. The girl was silent for a long time, as if she didn't know how to answer this question. After a while, she said, this servant thought, she was afraid that this servant would steal her husband, so she abused me in every possible way. Now, with just a few words, she has become a virtuous and loving mother. Forgive this servant for not being able to agree. Lu Jing listened to the girl's eloquent words, which were completely different from her previous timid appearance. It was an eye-opener for him. This wasn't a timid cub, with sharp claws hidden under its meaty pads. Then do you think that she sent you to me to stop you from stealing her favor? She harshly abused me every day, but now she says it's for my own good. Is there such a good thing in the world? The girl said, after father died, I didn't see her grieve for a single day. On that day, she went to another man's bed. This servant doesn't know. Is this considered a good wife and mother? Lu Jing shook his head. Chapter 1647. It's reasonable for you to think that way. Lu Jing didn't blame Kang Shintong. She was just a child who enjoyed her parents' love at a young age, but lost her loved ones overnight and couldn't understand her mother's pain. A child's thinking was different from an adult's. Adults could drag out an ignoble existence for a living, but a child's world was either black or white. The concept of gray had never existed. Lu Jing was also a father, so he was naturally more tolerant and patient with children. The girl clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. Sir, do you mean that you believe her flowery words? She felt that her mother was ridiculous. When her father was still alive, he let her live a life of luxury. Outsiders often envied the couple. But what happened in the end? Less than a day after her father's death, she climbed onto another man's bed and nestled in his arms. She was like a parasite that could only cling to men and couldn't survive without a man. She didn't care about her ex-husband's daughter at all. In order to please her current husband, she even abused the girl in every possible way. She didn't have enough to eat or wear, and she was forced to wash buckets by the stream in the dead of winter. Rome wasn't built in a day. Similarly, the young girl's hatred towards her mother was not something that could be accumulated in 1 or 2 days, or even 1 or 2 incidents. Lu Xing didn't answer and asked instead, "Do you know what a person wants in a chaotic world?" "To live." The girl didn't understand. Lu Xing continued, "Living is not difficult for ordinary women. If they are willing to let go of their dignity, they don't mind being humiliated like dogs, and they don't mind living a muddle-headed life. Even if they fall into the hands of alien tribes, they can still survive. But living is easy, living with dignity is difficult. No matter how you look at it, your mother is a smart woman." Kong Shintong still stubbornly insisted on her own opinion. Lu Xing also lost the mood to go back and stay up for the new year. He stopped and took another path. He knew that the girl was stuck in a dead end. Simple chicken soup for the soul wouldn't wake her up. The best way was to slap her in the face with facts. "Actually, your mother is your stepfather's concubine, not his legal wife." On the way to the destination, Lu Xing first gave the rebellious girl a heads-up to ensure that the effect would be the best. "Your stepfather was born in the wilderness. He was originally a rebel of the Red Lotus group in Dongqing. He married a wife in the countryside of Dongqing. It's just that those rural women are like weeds. Their colors are not bright, and they are abandoned in their hometown early on. It was very common for a man to leave his wife behind in his hometown and look for a new lover on the outside." Xing just wanted to tell the girl that a woman's face was indeed a weapon, but she couldn't use it as her most powerful weapon. Men covet color, but prefer freshness. "Did you know that your stepfather had ill intentions towards you?" "I understand," Kong Shintong said stubbornly. "Even if that old man took advantage of me, how bad can my ending be? To me, if I can borrow this face and become that man's concubine, I can live a better life. Who wouldn't I give myself to?" Lu Zheng's footsteps halted. He turned around and looked down at her, a mocking smile on his face. "Then I'll let you see a ending that's 10,000 times worse than being someone's slave." After saying this, Xing grabbed Kong Shintong and walked a few steps forward. He had long legs and a long body, but Kong Shintong was small. She almost stumbled and fell. Her gaze fell on his hand that was pinching her wrist. Xing didn't touch her hand directly, but through his wide sleeve. Xing took her to the dark alley where the prostitutes gathered. He had never been to such a place before, but he had heard of it. He had seen it from afar when he was patrolling earlier, and the situation was terrible. Tonight was New Year's Eve. Logically speaking, every family should be celebrating the new year, but the dark alley was still lively. There were many low, dark doors in the alley, and women in dirty clothes leaned against the doors. Their ages ranged from 7 or 8 to 50 or 60. Most of these women were in a sorry state. Their cheeks were purplish red from the cold wind, and some of their faces were covered with poor quality makeup. Other than the stench of sweat and poor quality makeup, there was also an indescribable smell in the air. When Kong Shintong passed by one of the women's short doors, the stench was even stronger. It was like a corpse that had been left in the hot summer for 7 or 8 days and hadn't been cleaned up. Even a thick layer of makeup couldn't hide the rancid smell. The woman's feet were covered with straw sandals, and her exposed ankles were covered with fine white pustules. Some of the pustules were already broken, and some were red from the woman's scratches. Kong Shintong's little face turned pale. Xing said, "Those leaning against the short doors are the prostitutes. These are still considered good. They can serve the guests and have a hut to shelter them from the wind and rain. Some of them just roll up a tattered mat and serve the guests in places with few people. Some of them are from good families, but most of them wander from place to place because of the persecution of the southern barbarians. Some of them were once the cheap concubines of rich families. Because of their old looks, they were despised and abandoned. They were sold to the broker house, and the broker house sold them to the brothel. The brothel has been receiving guests for 2 years, and they have changed from ordinary courtesans who receive 1 customer a day to the prostitutes who serve the peddlers. The number of customers they receive in a day is unknown. Not to mention silver and copper, they can even give themselves to a night's rancid rice bran. Other than these women in the dark alley, there were naturally men who patronized them. Kong Shintong glanced at them and found that their eyes were all on her. She immediately felt so disgusted that her hair stood on end. She grabbed LV Zhang's sleeves and caught up with him in small steps. Only then could she have some sense of security. LV Zhang was wearing brocade clothes. One look and one could tell that he wasn't a lowly person. Even if he were to linger in the brothel, he would go to a high-end and exquisite brothel to find a young and beautiful prostitute. The manservant beside him didn't dress well, but he was extremely handsome with a red face and white teeth. Such a combination didn't look like people who would linger in the brothel. For a moment, they attracted a lot of attention. However, these hooligans didn't dare to have any ideas. Even if they did, it would depend on whether the sword on LV Zhang's waist agreed. LV Zhang took Kong Shintong to walk through the dark alley. Kong Shintong came in with a puzzled face and went out with a pale face. You saw it all. LV Zhang looked at Kong Shintong's head and said calmly, now, what else do you want to say? Kong Shintong suddenly felt disgusted. She grabbed LV Zhang's sleeves and turned her head to vomit out acid. Her mind was full of what she saw and heard just now. The house in the dark alley was very shabby. The movements inside the door couldn't be blocked by a door or a window. Because of the light, she couldn't see what was happening inside, but just listening to the movements made her shudder. The woman's heart-wrenching cries of pain and begging for mercy, the man's violent and heavy breathing and obscene words, some houses were even more terrifying. There was only one woman in the house, but there was more than one man. Chapter 1648. She could not help but think of LV Zhang's previous words. It's easy to live, but it's hard to live with dignity. Kong Shintong did not dare to imagine that she would end up in such a situation many years later. After vomiting, she squatted down and wailed while hugging her knees, extremely resentful of her gender. Kong Shintong choked and said, Sir, all women in the world are like this. They are born to suffer. Why do women still exist? It's better to die since birth. So what if her mother did it for her own good? Did her mother disregard her wishes and thoughts and force her to suffer so much for her own good? What she thought was good, could it be that it was really good? Why didn't she ask herself which was better, a dignified and painless death or a dignified but oppressive and violent life? Violence and torture in the name of love, were they not abuse? LV Zhang interrupted her random thoughts at the right time. You have such messy thoughts because you have too little knowledge. It's just like how you only saw your mother's evil earlier. You don't know that all living beings suffer. Whether it's these women in the dark alley or other refugees who never have enough to eat, the most painful thing for them is not the torture inflicted on them, such as hunger and poverty. It's the endless torture that they can only be freed from until death. A person can't see the slightest bit of hope in life and can only live like a walking corpse. They don't even know why they're living, only knowing that they can live as long as they can. This kind of suffering without dignity is often more unbearable than physical torture. The common people could often endure physical torture, but they could not endure mental torture. The result of not being able to endure it was the idea of using death to escape like Kong Shintong. This was just going from a dead end to a dead end. What's the use of knowing more? Kong Shintong was, after all, a young girl who had just turned 12. Although her life was bumpy, she did not face the cruelest purgatory on earth. The world was still black and white. LV wanted to teach her what it meant to be gray. It's not that all women in the world are like this. It's just that the world is not stable. Anyone can fall into such a situation. LV said, using beauty to serve people is a shortcut, but not every shortcut can reach the same level. It was the same as using beauty to serve others, but there was also a difference in the target of serving others. If your target was your stepfather, the prostitutes in the dark alleys would most likely be the portrayal of the rest of your life. If your target was a noble with a high status and authority, or a hegemon who sat on the throne of the world, it would be a different situation. Isn't that because I'm inexperienced? Kong Shintong was speechless. After a while, she hung her head in embarrassment. I don't think I have that ability either. Kong Shintong knew that she had a good foundation and had inherited the best side of her biological parents. This could be seen from her stepfather's increasingly passionate and eccentric gaze these 2 years. Even though she was inexperienced, she knew what he was thinking. It was an undisguised, predatory look of a wild beast. Every time, her mother would panic and abuse her even more vigorously, which gave her an illusion. If that man was obedient to her, her mother would not dare to abuse her again. The repeated hints made her come up with this equation in her mind. Using her own body in exchange for power in the hands of a man, and using this to suppress her mother who bullied her, she could live a better life. Just as LV said, she was inexperienced, and her vision limited her imagination. The best choice she could think of was this, and the only target was her stepfather. Under such circumstances, how could she think that her beauty could attract someone who was more powerful than her stepfather? LV sighed and shook his head. Do you know who Lu Shi is? Kong Shintong shook her head. Even though Jiang Pingji was a famous and powerful feudal lord, not many people at the bottom of the hierarchy knew her. Dongqing was still all right. Jiang Pingji was quite well known. Many people knew the name of this feudal lord, where he was from, and whether he was a man or a woman. The people in Nanqing were more ignorant. It was good enough for them to know that there were other countries besides Nanqing, let alone feudal lords from other countries. They could not even maintain their lives, so how would they have the time to understand these things? Even if they wanted to, they had no corresponding channels. Lu Shi is a woman. Kong Shintong blinked in confusion and guessed, a stunning beauty. LV recalled the face of his childhood friend and shook his head to deny it. She was quite liked by the young ladies in Langyi County, but he had never heard of any man liking her. She had a nasty mouth and could not wait to gnash her teeth. On the contrary, Zixiao, who was known as the flower of Langyi County, was much more popular with men than that authentic woman. She is not a stunning beauty. It is true that she looks decent, but very few people pay attention to her face. Actually, no matter how ugly or beautiful she is, whether she is healthy or disabled, it is meaningless to her and the people around her. Kong Shintong asked, why is that? Because there are not many people in the world who are qualified to look directly at her face. When people bow down to her, they first see her feet and not her face. Kong Shintong asked again, is she the Empress? Empress? LV curled his lips mockingly. No matter how noble the Empress is, she still has to rely on her husband and her family. Once the country is destroyed, her husband no longer dotes on her, and her family abandons her. The Empress, who is second only to one and above tens of thousands of people, will also fall into a dark alley. How can she be compared to her? Kong Shintong could not understand who the Lu Shi that the teacher was talking about was. Lu Shi was a woman, but she had a more noble status than the Empress. Could she be the Empress? She asked timidly. The one who is more noble than the Empress is either the Empress or the deities in heaven, LoveLore said. She is not the Empress. After all, she did not announce to the world that she was going to ascend to the throne, but she is not far from being an Empress in name only. A dynasty could be established in the land of Dongqing. Jiang Pingji, who occupied a territory larger than Dongqing, was naturally qualified to be the Empress. However, her ambition was obviously not something that Dongqing could accommodate. Nanqing was also the target that the tip of her sword pointed at. Kong Shintong's small mouth opened wide as she listened. Her small face was full of shock. The higher you go, the further you can see. Even if you can't reach her level, looking at her, you can remember one thing: a woman's appearance is neither a blessing nor a curse. It is just a part of her that is given by her parents and is born with. Even though she is a woman, she is not born to crawl on the ground. LoveLore smiled and flicked her forehead. He said, as long as you stand at a higher position than others, your appearance will only be the capital that they praise you. On the other hand, you will be the prey that they covet. Just like your mother, she is just a prey. Kong Shintong's lips turned pale as she listened. Your mother is indeed at fault, but she sincerely hoped that you could live with dignity. It was rare for LoveLore to have the patience to say so much. Even he himself was surprised. If Wei Ci was also a salted fish in the streaming room, he could only express his feelings by clicking 666. Chapter 1649. Prejudice and hatred were accumulated over a long period of time. Even if LoveLore talked until his mouth was dry, Kong Shintong would not immediately understand her mother's painstaking efforts. However, she was willing to think from her mother's point of view with a fair attitude. This was already a great improvement. She could think about her mother's matters in the future. At the moment, Kong Shintong was more concerned about the matters in front of her, such as, "Teacher, do you also want me to be your concubine?" Children were different from adults. When adults mentioned these matters, most of them would conceal it because they knew that these matters could not be publicized. It was even shameful to talk about it aloud. Children, on the other hand, did not have so many concerns and were more frank. LoveLore patted her forehead with his palm and clicked his tongue. "Silly girl, you're not even as tall as a human. Do you really think that you're as beautiful as a fairy? In this world, not every man is as lustful as your stepfather. If you were 18 or 19 years old and asked this question, I would be willing to think about it. But now, you have the appearance of an 8 or 9-year-old. Even slightly normal men would look down on you." Kong Shintong blushed and blurted out, "This servant is already 12 years old." LoveLore rubbed the top of her head. "The wind is strong. Let's go back." "Yes." Kong Shintong could not help but bury her thin and flushed face into the cloak. The corners of her eyes were slightly red. LoveLore's mansion was much larger than Kong Shintong's stepfather's, but it was also much simpler. Whether it was the main door or the main hall used to receive guests, there were no decorations. It was very simple. There were only a few carvings on the walls. It looked simple but exuded comfort and elegance. On the other hand, Kong Shintong's stepfather could not wait to display all the gold and silver he won from the war outside to let outsiders see how rich his spoils of war were. Thinking of this, Kong Shintong could not help but let her imagination run wild. Teacher LV said that her mother was also a spoil of war. Then, her stepfather always liked to dress her up beautifully and let her attend the small gatherings of those gossipy madams. Was it also a kind of show-off? Showing off his spoils of war was a noble madam from an aristocratic family. She had good looks and self-restraint. There was nothing bad about her from head to toe. On the other hand, those madams were always dwarfed by her mother. From tomorrow onwards, you shall live in the residence as my adopted daughter. Lu Zheng took the hand warmer from a servant. A burst of warmth drove away the coldness on his fingertips in a domineering manner. He said, "There is no third master in the mansion except for me and you. If there were any shortages, he could go straight to the housekeeper. Except for the old maids who do the cleaning, the servants in the mansion are basically men. You are a girl, so you should have a few maids to take care of your daily life. Tomorrow, I will ask the housekeeper to pick a few maids from the broker house. You can choose 2 to stay with you." Kang Shintong stood on the spot. Her hands covered in red and purple frostbites were so skinny that they looked like skin and bones. She clutched the sides of her clothes tightly. Why is Mr. so nice to me? She didn't suspect that LV Jing had any bad intentions, but she didn't understand why LV Jing was so good to her. It must be known that in this world, even if parents raised their children, their original intention was to continue the bloodline and continue the family line. People who were truly selfless were probably as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. Lu Jing said, "There's no special reason. To be honest, it's probably because I've been bored recently." Kang Shintong was stunned. What kind of reason was this? Even if she didn't understand LV Zhang's identity, even her stepfather, who had a bad temper and couldn't be persuaded after he was drunk, was respectful to LV Zhang. It could be seen that LV Zhang should be an important person. Shouldn't an important person be busy with a myriad of affairs and have no leisure time? Lu Jing said again, "Why do you care so much? It's not a bad thing for you anyway. You have nothing for others to plot against you." Kang Shintong said in embarrassment, "I overestimated myself. I've made a fool of myself in front of Mr. LV Jing asked the housekeeper to tidy up the guest courtyard for Kang Shintong to stay for the time being. Kang Shintong saw that he didn't leave and couldn't help but ask a few more questions out of curiosity. "Did Mr. say that you already have a family?" LV Jing slowly blew on the freshly brewed tea to cool it down and poured a cup for her. Kang Shintong had led a hard life these years, but she was pampered and spoiled in the early years. The moment she sat down, her temperament couldn't be faked. It was obvious that she had received an excellent education. LV Jing said casually, "Yes, but they're not here. It's too messy here. I'm worried." Kang Shintong let down her guard. She looked quiet, but her mouth loved to talk. She chattered non-stop. LV Jing couldn't help but think of someone. Kang Shintong knew her limits. She didn't probe too much into LV Zhang's situation. Instead, she changed the topic to Jiang Pingji. Her hands clutched the teacup tightly and she said softly, "Mister, can you tell me more about Lu Shi?" LV Jing wasn't surprised. "She used to be my classmate." Kang Shintong's eyes were big to begin with. At that moment, her eyes widened even more because of her shock. "Classmate? But isn't she a girl? How could she be your classmate?" LV Jing said, "She was disguised as a man by her father since she was young. She only came out in broad daylight many years ago." "Are the bystanders blind? They can't tell that she's a girl." Kang Shintong had just finished speaking when she saw LV Zhang's indescribable gaze. She suddenly realized that she had said something wrong. She hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. "Mister, I didn't mean that it's normal that they couldn't recognize her. After all, no girl would be like her. At that time, men were still very feminine." Jiang Pingji blended in very well with them. Little did they know that she was the dream girl of many young and ignorant gentry girls. LV Jing seemed to have thought of something. His expression twisted for a moment. Even though he hadn't spent much time with Jiang Pingji, she had successfully left a nightmarish shadow in LV Zhang's heart. Even though he was hurt, LV Jing didn't deny everything about Jiang Pingji. Lu Shi didn't have much of a reputation when he was young. I went to Hejin County to ask around. Most people only vaguely knew that there was such a Lang Jun. He lived in the inner residence for a long time. The teacher was a famous scholar in Dongqing, Wei Yuan. I couldn't find out more about him, Elvijing said. He showed his talent at the age of 12. He trained the troops, cleared the bandits, and became Yuan Jing's disciple. After 3 years, Dongqing was in chaos. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline were aggressive. Lu Shi's sister was betrothed to the 4th prince of Dongqing, Wuma Jun. She represented her father, Lu Shi, to send her off. Not long after, she was put under house arrest in Shangjing. House arrest? Kong Shintong exclaimed. Elvijing said, this involved the struggle between the 2 factions in the Dongqing court. The reason was more complicated. In order to stabilize his power, the Dongqing emperor ordered the gentry to send their descendants to Shangjing as hostages. If you're interested in it in the future, you can study it. Then how did she get out? Elvijing said, I don't know what method she used to get out. Before I saw her move, there was an earthquake in Shangjing. The earthquake in Shangjing caused the royal family to move the capital. They abandoned the deserted capital and moved to Qinzhou. They also abandoned the people on that land. Chapter 1650. Starting from the lowly county magistrate of Xiangyang district, she led people to clean up the mess, quell the chaos of the Tsing-Yi army, then annihilate the Red Lotus group and unify the entire Wanzhou. Then came the alliance meeting at Huangshui. She joined forces with the alliance to fight against the fake emperor, Prince Changshu. She led troops into Qinzhou to rescue the emperor. Her identity as a woman was exposed in court. Not only did she not lose the position of magistrate of Wanzhou because of her gender, but she used her military power to force people to recognize her as the magistrate of Wanzhou. She entered Chongzhou and sent troops to the northern borderline. Step by step, from Xiangyang district to Wanzhou, then to the overlord of the entire north. The Su brothers lost their lives in Shanqing one after another. Huang Song suffered a crushing defeat, leaving behind a grudge in Changye. Zhangjiang Pass resisted Zhongzhou's Nielyang, Zhangzhou's naval forces defeated Yang Tao. In just a few words, she described the situation of the world. Kong Shintong listened attentively. She clenched and relaxed her fists on her knees, completely ignoring the pain and itchiness of her frostbite. Lu Jing didn't expect Jiang Pingji to do so many things over the years. She talked about them one by one until his mouth was dry. She lived a life that others couldn't even dream of in 10 lifetimes. Kong Shintong said, she's the only one in the world. I'm afraid other women won't be able to reach her in their lifetimes, that's natural. If every woman jumped up and down like Lu Shi, wishing for the world to be in chaos, how can the world be peaceful? Lu Jing didn't expect Kong Shintong to become the second Jiang Pingji. She couldn't do that. But, don't limit your vision to stepfather. If you really want to climb higher, then set your sights higher. For example, Lu Shi. She couldn't become the second Jiang Pingji, but she could become the best version of herself. Kong Shintong hadn't met Jiang Pingji yet, but the latter had left the deepest and most colorful stroke in her heart. Her impression was deeper than anyone else's. If Wei Ci found out that Kong Shintong had been recommended by Lu Jing and made the future Red Lotus Saintess Jiang Pingji's fan, this recommendation was too vicious. Perhaps An Shui would also doubt his life. Was Lu Jing his advisor or a spy Jiang Pingji planted by his side? He didn't hear wrongly. The 2 malignant tumors that led the Red Lotus case that should have happened in the future had knelt. The world had just settled down, and His Majesty only had his eldest daughter, Jiang Yan. She had repeatedly wanted to make Jiang Yan the crown prince, but she was obstructed by various parties. On the surface, she was the imperial censor, but in reality, she was also interfered with by the scholars and the commoners. Everyone always said that His Majesty was still in the prime of his life and that he would live for 10,000 years in the future, so there was no hurry to appoint a crown prince. In fact, he was just stalling for time, hoping that Her Majesty would have another child, perhaps a boy. At that time, everyone would elect the prince as the heir apparent. Perhaps His Majesty would be persuaded. More than a year after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty, Her Majesty became pregnant again. The court seemed calm, but in fact, undercurrents were surging in the dark. All the forces had their own plans. Looking at it now, Wei Xi felt that Her Majesty was the one who was the most scheming, bullying her own subjects in various ways. When he was in the middle of a happy birthday, the remnants of the Red Lotus group rose from the ashes and even spread their teachings to the officials' back residences. Some people with ulterior motives had tried to use the Red Lotus group to harm Her Majesty and Jiang Yan. The Red Lotus group had also used them to open the door to infiltrate the palace and plan an assassination. The Red Lotus group was very good at picking the time. It happened to be the day when Her Majesty launched the happy birthday. Even though he later found out that this was all done on purpose by Her Majesty and that the whole situation was part of her plan to kill the disobedient people in the court, Wei Xi was still so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. This religious assassination was also known as the Red Lotus case. The leader of the Red Lotus group was the grandson of Wu Liba, the sage of the northern borderline. Of course, this fish that had escaped the net was killed by Wei Xi in advance during the Battle of the Northern Borderline. The other leader was the Virgin of the Red Lotus group, a woman who used to go by the name of Kong Shintong. The remnants of the Red Lotus group were wiped out, and Kong Shintong was also caught. What shocked Wei Xi was that after this woman was caught, she almost escaped from prison. Someone helped her escape, and someone wanted her dead. After careful investigation, in a sense, Kong Shintong was a little awesome. Her Majesty, who was sitting calmly on the fishing platform, ate melon seeds and watched the show. At the same time, she threw a thick file of information about Kong Shintong. Kong Shintong was born into a noble family in Nanxing. When she was young, she and her mother were captured by the southern barbarians and suffered a lot. Because her mother covered for her, Kong Shintong struggled to grow up to the age of 13. At the age of 13, her mother died, and her identity was exposed. In order to seek a better life for herself, she had no choice but to use her beauty to seduce the leader of the southern barbarians. With the help of the leader's power, she killed the barbarians who had once taken her. After 2 years of peace, and Cui forced the southern barbarians into a desperate situation. Before he ordered a massacre, Kong Shintong disappeared. When she reappeared several years later, she became the Virgin of the Red Lotus group, an underground cult. No one knew where Kong Shintong learned some treacherous sorcery and deceived the people. She began to infiltrate the inner residences of the officials and developed followers. Wu Liba's grandson ran the Red Lotus group and propagated its teachings. Kong Shintong used these followers to attract more people to become her subjects. Some people joined the Red Lotus group because of her beauty, while others joined because of the Red Lotus group's secret power. Like a rolling snowball, the Red Lotus group grew stronger in a short 2 or 3 years, forming a huge network of connections. Wei Xi still remembered Her Majesty's complaints. This child is so beautiful, but she ran off to engage in multi-level marketing. How stupid is she? How did Her Majesty find out about the Red Lotus group? Although the Red Lotus group had developed quite a lot, they were all operating in the dark. The court officials they had drawn in had also infiltrated from the periphery. They were very careful in their actions. Her Majesty was busy with court affairs. She had been expecting a happy birthday for the past few months. She did not have the energy to care about the Red Lotus group. Facts had proven that Her Majesty was a little monster with exuberant energy. Her plans to plot against the Red Lotus group and the restless aristocrats and commoners in the court began more than a year ago. Do you still remember your birthday last year? Wei Ci said, I remember. Her Majesty said, that day, when I went to the spring square to listen to Huanyang sing, I saw Jingtu go to the wine shop next door and get drunk. Although he looked confused, Wei Ci still listened carefully, trying to analyze the relationship between Fu Wang getting drunk and the Red Lotus group. Jingtu quarreled with his wife. Logically speaking, I should not interfere in the family affairs of the officials. But since I saw it, I have to ask about it. It would not be good if serious business was delayed because of family affairs. Her Majesty looked for excuses for gossip with a serious face. After asking carefully, I found out that Jingtu's subordinate had secretly presented him with a beauty. At the same time, many unspeakable rumors reached Jingtu's wife's ears. That wife was very angry and said that she was seeking death. Although Jingtu returned the beauty, his wife was still sad. Fu Wang's wife was naturally Hui Jun in this life. Although their experiences were different, they had the same ups and downs. In the end, she became Fu Wang's wife, which caused people to talk about for a while. Because of this, Fu Wang's wife was quite low-key and almost never appeared in public. The beauty presented by his subordinate was Kong Xintong. Fu Wang refused the temptation, but his wife closed the door in his face. After getting drunk, Fu Wang complained to Her Majesty that he had been cheated by an immortal. That woman is beautiful, but my wife is not the slightest bit inferior. Am I, Fu Jingtu, the kind of person who forgets his wife when he sees love? When Her Majesty heard this, he took it seriously. Fu Wang's wife was the first lady in terms of appearance. If she was not the slightest inferior to her, the effect of bribing Fu Wang would be greatly reduced. Her Majesty went back to investigate and found out that the Red Lotus group was involved. Chapter 1651. What he said was true, but Wei Ci was not sure how true His Majesty's words were or how much he was joking. If it was in his previous life, Wei Ci would have believed it 100%. He wouldn't have dared to doubt it. In this life, the more he understood her, the more Wei Ci knew how deep her heart was hidden under her cynical appearance. He thought that Her Majesty's plan against the Red Lotus group was probably earlier than what she said. She could see through people's hearts and control the overall situation. As her enemies, they often didn't even know how they were plotted against. To be honest, it wasn't clear whether the courtiers were lucky or unlucky to have met such an emperor. Whether she was a lord or an emperor, her scheming and strategizing didn't lose out to any counselor. She didn't lose out when it came to scheming and plotting against the entire court. Sometimes Wei Ci even imagined that if it wasn't for the fact that Her Majesty's energy was limited, she might be able to carry the entire chaotic world by herself. This could be seen from the court records after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty. As the banker, she would definitely win. As someone who boasted about Her Majesty and Her Majesty, Wei Ci could boast about her even with his eyes closed. Wei Ci was Jiang Pingji's fan leader and the chief instructor of the Internet Water Army. It was normal for him to boast about Jiang Pingji, but Lu Zheng was more confused. As Enchui's counselor, Lu Zheng had unintentionally helped Jiang Pingji sell several copies. In the end, he had even turned the future leader of the Red Lotus group into a fan. That was a wonderful move. Of course, that wasn't the best part. The best part was that Kong Xintong was determined to treat Jiang Pingji as her idol for life. She wanted to be her only fan. LV Jing smiled with relief. He was indeed Master Yuanjing's student. He was good at teaching and educating people. Wasn't this rebellious and Chinibu awakened by his strong medicine? It's good to have ambition, but you have to think clearly. No matter how high Lu she stands or how far she goes, she's a rare existence among women. She can be a role model, but you can't be too obsessed with her success. The world treats women harshly. Maybe you've worked 10 times harder to be on par with a man who has worked twice as hard. It's far from the results you expected. Lu Jing gave Kong Shintong a heads up to prevent her from falling behind. Even so, you won't change your mind. Kong Shintong was still young and couldn't fully understand Lu Zhang's words, but she could hear how serious and solemn he was. After careful consideration, Kong Shintong nodded heavily. She didn't expect to become as powerful as her idol, but she wanted to live with dignity. Kong Shintong wanted her mother to see what was the most dignified life for a woman. May I be so bold as to ask Mr. to show me the right path and teach me how to achieve my wish? Kong Shintong bowed to Lu Zhang without saying a word. Her slightly perplexed eyes were now filled with stubbornness and pleading. Zhang raised his hand and pressed her shoulder. She looked at him expectantly and cautiously. Call me godfather. His own child was still crawling, so Lu Zhang planned to adopt a foster daughter to satisfy his fatherly cravings. At the same time, he could also practice and learn how to be a qualified father. Hearing Lu Zhang's words, Kong Shintong instantly understood and called out, "Godfather." Zhang gladly agreed. Kong Shintong bowed again joyfully and said loudly, "Godfather, please accept a bow from your daughter." Coincidentally, the housekeeper had already tidied up the courtyard. Zhang arranged for Kong Shintong to rest. He planned to think about how to carve this unpolished jade into the best work of art. He was used to staying up late, so he was still full of energy the next day. Kong Shintong, on the other hand, was a little sleepy. Everything that happened yesterday was too dreamy. She couldn't fall asleep after lying down, afraid that it would be a dream when she woke up. Zhang didn't suspect anything and thought that the child was unfamiliar with the bed and wasn't used to it. On this end, the newly adopted father and daughter ate breakfast together, but they didn't know that Kong Shintong's mother suffered at the same time. Her snow-white skin was left with a pair of green and red fingerprints. 2 palm prints were very swollen, and her entire face was swollen. It was as if a perfect painting had been carelessly smeared by a naughty child, losing its beauty. The person who hit her was none other than Kong Shintong's stepfather. Her stepfather was drunk last night and promised to send Kong Shintong out in a daze. When he woke up the next day, he regretted it. He had secretly coveted Kong Shintong for 2 years and originally planned to bring her in after a year. Who knew that the fruit he had been looking forward to for 2 years would be taken away by Zhang? He respected Zhang and naturally didn't dare to blame him, but his anger had to be vented. Because of this, Kong Shintong's mother suffered. Although he was an illiterate boorish man, he still had a meticulous side. With a little tidying up, he could guess who was behind this. Kong Shintong's mother was a woman he had doted on for several years. He was usually very satisfied with her, but who knew that this woman also had disloyalty? Kong Shintong had always been doing the lowliest menial work and didn't have the chance to come to the front yard, so her range of activity was limited. He didn't believe that if it wasn't for this woman's arrangement, Kong Shintong, who had always been imprisoned to do menial work, would have the chance to be taken away by Zhang in the front yard. In his anger, he slapped Kong Shintong's mother twice, causing her to see stars and her ears to hear the sound of a stream. "Bitch, your jealous face is really hateful." He had a murderous look on his face as if he could rush in front of her and strangle her to death in the next second. Kong Shintong's mother took a long time to recover. A bloody taste filled her mouth and her molars were loose. "Lang Jun, please forgive me. Why would I be jealous of my niece?" She endured the nausea of the world spinning and crawled to his feet. She hugged his calf and begged, "Lang Jun, you don't know. It was clearly that little bitch who heard that Master LV was a guest at your residence and had the thought of playing up to him. She put in a lot of effort to climb up to him. I'm really wronged. As she spoke, she cried as if it was really the case. The man's heart softened for a moment, but he still lifted his leg and kicked her away, leaving behind a sentence. Lock yourself in the backyard and reflect on yourself. If there's a next time, I'll cut off your head. He had been looking forward to it for 2 years, but in the end, it was all for nothing because of a woman's jealousy. He was depressed to death. The more unobtainable something was, the more people yearned for it. He deliberately sent people to LV Zheng's residence to find out the situation. It would be best if LV Zheng took Kong Xintong as a concubine. These days, it was considered elegant to treat guests as concubines and give each other concubines. He could use a young and beautiful girl to exchange for Kong Xintong. If one was not enough, then he would get a pair. He never thought that LV Zheng would really take Kong Xintong as his adopted daughter. This adopted daughter was not a godfather and goddaughter who hung a sheep's head and sold dog meat, but a real father and daughter. In other words, if he continued to covet Kong Xintong, he would covet LV Zheng's daughter. It was true that he cared about Kong Xintong, but he would not offend LV Zheng because of a little girl. He could only let this matter go. Chapter 1652. Jiang Pingji didn't know that Lu Zheng was diligently cultivating his loyal fans. After the new year, the originally relaxed atmosphere dissipated and was replaced by solemnity and tension. Since the assassination of the Nan family in Finzhou, Jiang Pingji had changed so much that she was like a different person. At first, everyone was not used to it, but they got used to it after a while. Just as Wei Xi had said, their lord had grown up and become sensible. Because of Jiang Pingji's timely change, she accidentally extinguished the original hidden danger and avoided a potential crisis. As long as everyone was united, they were confident that they could tear the whole world apart, let alone in Shui. A few days after the new year, Jiang Pingji called for a meeting. The topic of the meeting was naturally how to get rid of Shui. Yes, Jiang Pingji was pure and unpretentious. She told everyone that she had suffered a loss at Shui's hands last year. If she didn't get back at him this year, she wouldn't be able to take it lying down. She didn't know what euphemism was. One could imagine how their lord's reputation would be if these words were recorded in the annals of history. Among everyone, only Wei Xi was worried for 3 seconds. Yang Xi and the others had long given up on treatment. Whatever. Turning their heads, not only Jiang Pingji, but the others were also rubbing their fists and getting ready to do something big. If there are no objections, it's decided for now. Jiang Pingji looked around and took in everyone's expressions. After waiting quietly for a while, she repeated her question. For now, we'll send troops to conquer Shui before the spring plowing. Does anyone have any other opinions? Regardless of whether it was Jiang Pingji or the others, most of them agreed to start the war before the spring plowing. Only a few wanted to wait until the spring plowing was over. Everyone had their own reasons. Jiang Pingji listened carefully to different voices and analyzed the pros and cons of each opinion. In the end, she decided to send troops before the spring plowing. Her decision didn't attract opposition from the officials. Instead, it caused the idle people to be puzzled. They hadn't been following the live stream for so many years for nothing. Naturally, they knew how important ancient farming was. Unless they had no other choice, both sides would wait until the spring plowing was over before starting the war. Spring plowing was too important to the ancient people who depended on the weather to make a living. Wasting a year's spring plowing was equivalent to a year's worth of food going down the drain. The probability of famine in the following year was greatly increased. Understanding this, they couldn't understand Jiang Pingji's choice. Guoli Guiduo, isn't spring plowing very important? If I remember correctly, the host was in a tight spot last year. Under such circumstances, shouldn't she place more emphasis on this year's spring plowing? If we start the war before the spring plowing, it would affect not only the enemy, but also our side. In the salted people's eyes, this choice was no different from suicide. Common people do not benefit themselves, and both sides suffer. Todo fecho, I'm a little confused too. I don't understand why the host is taking such a risk. And seems to have the advantage, but after careful analysis, I feel that the host still has a large chance of winning. Couldn't they fight steadily and surely? Why did they have to use such a method? Gue s jiang 1 jiang yang can gue kaiguo fengxiu. I seem to have guessed it. Host, is this related to Enchui's fortification last year? Last year, in order to make things difficult for Jiang Pingji, Enchui had deliberately given Nanqing and Xing prefectures to her. On the surface, Jiang Pingji had the upper hand. She conquered the two prefectures without much effort, but she didn't know that 70 to 80% of the grains and young men in the two prefectures had been forcibly conscripted and gathered by Enchui. And had the upper hand, leaving Jiang Pingji with two prefectures to deal with. She had to pay for nearly 1 million people's grains and winter supplies. She also had to prevent the local gentry in the two prefectures from taking the opportunity to cause trouble. Not only did it cost money, but it also took a lot of effort. What about Enchui? He had a great winter. Not only did he have a bigger purse, but he also became a father. Gue, Feng Xiao, Long. Many people remembered when he mentioned this. However, what was the connection between Enchui's fortification and Jiang Pingji's abandonment of spring plowing? Naturally, there was a connection. Jiang Pingji gave up the spring plowing to attack Enchui. She only abandoned the spring plowing in Nanqing and Nanqing prefectures. The plowing in Dongqing and Beizhou, northern borderline, was not affected, but Enchui could not. He plundered a lot of grains from the two prefectures last year, but the young men he took with him had to eat too. If the spring plowing could not keep up with the harvest this year, there would definitely be a food shortage. When an army went to war, a lack of food was almost equivalent to losing half of the war. If everything went smoothly, Enchui would not last until this autumn. Jiang Pingji intended to end the war quickly. She wanted to take advantage of his weakness and kill him. After dealing with Enchui, she would turn around and take care of Zhongzhou, speeding up the pace of unifying the world. While everyone was discussing the details, Jiang Pingji briefly explained her intentions to the salted fishes. Some salted fishes were stubborn. They felt that Jiang Pingji did not need to be so anxious. Steady attacks were the way to go. Some salted fishes supported Jiang Pingji's choice unconditionally. Of course, there was a small group of salted fishes who felt that something was wrong, but they could not put their finger on it. When everyone was discussing how to distribute the troops, they were shocked to discover that Jiang Pingji was not in the starting lineup. Jiang Pingji, who had been fighting at the front lines all year round, was actually in the middle of the army. Gao Ju Pingzi Shipi Daki, wait. Streamer, why aren't you at the front lines anymore? I'm not used to it. After following the live stream for so many years, their favorite segment was to see Jiang Pingji persistently wanting to go to the front lines. The civil and military officials tried their best to stop her. They had a heart attack, but they had no choice but to accept Jiang Pingji's willfulness. Such an interesting segment was gone today. Not only were the salted fishes not used to it, but Yang Saifengzhen and the others were also at a loss. They looked at Jiang Pingji, and Jiang Pingji looked back at them with a serious expression. Both parties looked at each other for more than 10 seconds. The air fell into an awkward and strange silence. Do you have any other opinions? Jiang Pingji glanced at the entire setup. There should not be any loopholes. Why did everyone look like they were stupid? Why did they not go and prepare for battle after receiving the military order? Why were they here staring at her? My lord, did you miss something? Li Yun asked cautiously. What did I miss? I didn't miss anything. What did I miss? Jiang Pingji looked puzzled. Fu Wang suddenly coughed awkwardly. He cupped his fists and bade farewell. Time to go, time to go. Fu Wang left. As if awakened from a dream, the others got up in twos and threes. After leaving the main tent, Li Yun still had a dreamy look on his face. My lord has really turned over a new leaf. Bah, what do you mean by turning over a new leaf? Isn't this pretty good? Go and do what you have to do. Yang Si slapped Li Yun's shoulder, interrupting him to prevent him from saying something even more appalling and stupid. My lord's ears are very sharp. Li Yun nodded repeatedly and left in a hurry, as if there was a monster chasing him from behind. Jiang Pingji. Chapter 1653. Did these people think she was deaf? If they really wanted to make things up behind her back, they could at least do it from a distance. At such a close distance, what was the difference between that and making things up in front of her? Yang Si and the others are becoming more and more like princesses. They're super hard to please. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but shake her head. She had a helpless but doting expression. In the past, she always wanted to lead the vanguard troops and wanted to use herself as a general. They tried their best to stop her, almost crying and hanging themselves. When they couldn't stop them, they would show a wronged and helpless expression, making people feel guilty for no reason. Now that she had learned from her painful experience, she planned to make a fundamental change. Even honest people like Li Yun couldn't get used to it. It made it seem like it was her fault from the beginning to the end. Jiang Pingji felt wronged, but she didn't say it. Because all the officials had retreated, they didn't know that they were being blamed by their lord. Instead, it was the salted fish who felt it was unfair for them. Listen to what Jiang Pingji said. Shiring-chan, I can see that the streamer really doesn't know what's going on. Bao Xian, the little princess is the one who feels wronged. Doesn't your conscience hurt when you say that? Sitting on the grave and enjoying the moon, oh, the streamer is a big pig trotter. She really should let little Rong and the rest come back to listen to her and see her true colors. They are the ones who should feel wronged, okay? Shui Chwiz Hong's hoodie. Previously, people told me that the streamer has changed. I didn't believe it, but I didn't expect it to be true. Anyone who had some understanding of the streaming room knew Jiang Pingji's bad temper. As the saying goes, it's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change a person's nature. It was quite torturous to let an unrestrained person who loved freedom be confined to the rear and watch others do as they pleased. The salted fish always thought that being diligent was her limit. When there was a war, she would definitely show her true colors. Who knew that she had really changed? She didn't even play in her favorite battlefield. You Abbe, don't you feel uncomfortable watching this? Jiang Pingji said, I don't feel uncomfortable, I'm just not used to it. The 7th Corps was the Federation's first line of defense against the enemy. It was the sharpest knife. It was dispatched to wherever there was war. Even if she didn't like war, she had gotten used to it after so many years. Fighting was as common as eating and drinking to her. To have a person like her, who was born to fight, retreat to the rear and watch others rush to the battlefield, facing dangers that she didn't know if she would survive or not. She, who had combat strength, couldn't personally kill the enemy. Instead, she had to suppress the restless bloodthirst in her body. No matter how she looked at it, she wasn't used to it. However, even if he was not used to it, he had to get used to it. Jiang Pingji took a deep breath and suppressed that feeling. Your Abbe, you'll have to get used to it sooner or later. Speaking of which, aren't you worried that something will happen to them on the battlefield? The old chief knew what kind of person Jiang Pingji was. She loved the battlefield. Other than the bloodthirst in her bones, it was mostly for the sake of others. The more enemies she killed, the fewer enemies the others had to face. Naturally, the pressure on them would lessen. Of course, she couldn't say these mushy words out loud. Outsiders could only experience it for themselves. As expected, Jiang Pingji denied it. Why should I worry about them? They're not 3-year-old kids. They don't need me to look after them on the battlefield. A general is a profession where one's head is tied to one's belt. If they're afraid of death, they won't be able to make a living, Jiang Pingji said. Worry? There's no shadow of it. You're Abba, a woman who says one thing but means another. Jiang Pingji didn't think that she was saying one thing but meant one thing. There was no one else in the world who was more consistent than her. I, Jiang Pingji, have never been a hypocrite. I say whatever I want to say. She said it righteously and sternly. The old chief coldly replied with 2 words, ha. The old chief is a decent person. Don't learn bad things from the group of salted fish in the streaming room. You should be dignified and dignified. Under the scourge of 5 million salted fish, Jiang Pingji couldn't look directly at those 2 words. Because behind every ha was, I bought a watch last year. Seeing the sarcastic ha, she knew that the old chief had learned a lot from the streaming room. Was his life so leisurely after retirement? You're Abba, then I'll say something else, Jiang Xiaozhou. I advise you to have some sense of propriety. Jiang Pingji, at the end of the meeting, the starting lineup for the match against Enchui was basically confirmed. Apart from a few familiar faces, Jiang Pingji also promoted a few young faces. However, newcomers meant that they were young and inexperienced. It was easy for them to be taken advantage of when they met with veterans on the battlefield. Under normal circumstances, many people preferred to use experienced or capable veterans. For new generals, unless they had outstanding military exploits or impressive combat abilities, they had to wait for a few years. It was rare for Jiang Pingji to promote newcomers as frequently as she did. Why? Previously, she was short of people and had to promote newcomers. Now that she's not short of people, shouldn't she prioritize safety? Could it be that she's still guarding against us? Yang Tao rarely came up with a conspiracy theory, but his conjecture was so crude that it made people speechless. It doesn't seem like it. Even though we haven't had much contact, based on our observations these days, Lu Lanting isn't a two-faced villain. If Jiang Pingji was the kind of villain who said she would promote people to important positions but secretly schemed against them, Yang Tao wouldn't have such a good impression of her. It's not about the lack of people. Yan Lin wanted to explain, but seeing that Yang Tao was confused, he gave a simple example. If Shengze was a talented general who had been suppressed for many years and had no hope of being promoted, what would you think? After a long time, even if you don't resent him, you'll lose the will to improve. You'll either be depressed and resentful of the world, or completely dispirited and muddle along. If the enemy sent someone to instigate a rebellion and gave them a bright future, very few people wouldn't be tempted. Lu Lanting boldly promoted newcomers and gave them a chance to be promoted. Not only could she nurture young talents, but it was also a way for her to win people's hearts. That's why there's less infighting under Lu Lanting's banner. Most infighting in the world was due to political views, while the rest was due to conflicts of interest. In other words, there were too many monks and too little porridge. With so many monks trying to snatch the same bowl of porridge, they got angry and naturally started fighting over it. How could this conflict be resolved? Most of the feudal lords tried to mediate between the two monks. They tried to persuade one monk to live harmoniously and the other monk to focus on the bigger picture. There was no solution to the question of who should get the bowl of porridge. This method was to smooth things over. In the end, the fight would still be fought. Jiang Pingji was different. When others fought over a bowl of porridge, she did not step forward to mediate. Instead, she took out a few steamed buns. Even though it was risky, Yan Lin thought it was a good way to solve the root of the problem. I see. Chapter 1654. It was still a chilly spring, and the snow had just melted. The air was filled with a cold chill. However, the coolness of the outside world could not cool down Enchui's rising fury. No one expected that Jiang Pingji would use a method that harmed others without benefiting herself. There was still half a month before the spring plowing. This made Enchui wonder if the other party had gone mad, to be so hot-tempered. Even a war had to be fought according to the basic laws. Jiang Pingji actually destroyed the spring plowing. Was she planning to fly into the sky? It was common knowledge that spring plowing was the first major event of the year. Enchui had sent people to prepare early on, expending a lot of manpower and resources. As long as this year's harvest was good and there was enough food, Jiang Pingji had nothing to fear. He had never expected that she would play her cards so unconventionally. She would risk her own spring plowing to attack Enchui. By now, she had already crossed the river and torn down Enchui's fence. When Enchui heard the news in the morning, her happiness from the new year was washed away. When did this happen? Why did you only report it now? And couldn't help but ask again, thinking that she was hallucinating. The soldier who delivered the message repeated nervously, "My lord, 3 days ago, Lu Shi's troops attacked our border town and forced their way across the Biling River. It happened so suddenly that the defending general was patrolling outside and carelessly let the enemy take advantage of a loophole. In the end, he had no choice but to retreat 30 miles. Enchui heard it clearly now, and his face turned green. Biling River was a river that lay between Jiang Pingji and Enchui. The surface of the river was 7 miles long, which was about 3,500 meters. This river was also one of the main streams of water in Nanxing. It irrigated both sides of the river and fed countless people. Because the soil here was fertile and easy to water, coupled with the fact that Nanxing was located in the south, the climate was humid, and they could harvest crops twice a year. Enchui still hoped that this place could alleviate the food shortage and give him the capital to fight Jiang Pingji for a long time. He never expected that Jiang Pingji would suddenly make things difficult for him. Not only did she disrupt the spring plowing, but she also seized this piece of fat meat. Enchui was slapped awake by reality. His face was ashen, and 2 flames of anger danced in the depths of his eyes, as if he wanted to burn everything he saw. In his anger, Enchui used his sleeve to sweep away all the things piled up on the table, causing them to crash to the ground. Everyone heard the news and rushed over, just in time to see it. No one dared to provoke her at this time. They could only secretly glance at Hua Yuan, hoping that he would say something to appease them. Hua Yuan did not let them down. He stepped forward and bowed. "My lord, please calm down." Enchui said, "How can I calm my anger? Do you know what Lu Shi did? She's crazy." Hua Yuan naturally knew what had happened. Otherwise, he would not have been called over. Things have already been decided. No matter how angry my lord is, it doesn't change anything. For now, the most important thing is to think of a way to deal with Lu Shi's army. At the same time, we need to hold the defending general accountable for his negligence. Hua Yuan's light words had changed the subject. Enchui had nowhere to vent his anger. The others in the tent felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. Why? According to the content of the battle report, the defending general did not neglect his duty at all. Jiang Pingji sent a large number of troops to attack the place, and the defending general could not defend it no matter how hard he tried. Furthermore, the two sides of the Bailing River were wide open, and there were basically no guarded passes. Jiang Pingji was also an expert in land warfare. The Steel Horsemen under her command had even defeated the 3 tribes of the northern borderline who had once dominated the grasslands of the northern borderline. How could a mere 20 to 30,000 soldiers trip her up? It was the biggest joke in the world. Hua Yuan's way of changing the subject had calmed Enchui's anger, but it had also brought an undeserved disaster to the defending general. Enchui calmed down a little. Panting heavily, he asked, "Do you have a good plan?" "I'm incompetent. I can't share my lord's burden." Hua Yuan blamed himself, then changed the topic and shifted the blame. Hearing this, everyone secretly cursed him for being cunning. He said, "But my lord has a lot of talented people under your command. You can gather everyone's wisdom and strength to come up with a countermeasure." Enchui glanced at the hesitant officials around him. His mood, which had just improved, fell again. Apart from Hua Yuan, the others were like good-for-nothings who could not do anything. They were like worms who ate the Lord's salary but could not share his burden. From the moment they entered until now, apart from Hua Yuan who dared to speak in spite of his anger, the others were like mutes, not uttering a single word. Therefore, although Hua Yuan did not come up with a plan, Enchui was even more satisfied with him. He even sighed in his heart that Hua Yuan was the most loyal and devoted person in the world. Lu Zheng. Lu Zheng's presence was getting weaker and weaker. He had been in the background during the new year. How could Enchui think of him? Everyone had been forced to do something beyond their abilities by Hua Yuan. After offering their suggestions, they did not get anything out of it, because Enchui only cared about Hua Yuan. After they dispersed, everyone left the main tent in 2s and 3s, intentionally or unintentionally isolating Hua Yuan. There was something strange about this matter. Although Hua Yuan had made many contributions, in terms of weight, Lu Zheng was clearly more important. In the end, his lord Enchui seemed to have taken the wrong medicine and trusted Hua Yuan wholeheartedly. Especially after the new year, he almost wanted to worship Hua Yuan. From time to time, he would talk to him by candlelight, and the two of them would sleep together. Even Lu Zheng had not valued him this much back then. There were even people who disliked Hua Yuan who mocked him behind his back. Hua Yuan was not the #1 strategist in Enchui's tent at all. He was clearly the #1 strategist in someone else's tent. Of course, these words would not reach Hua Yuan's ears. They had all seen this man's cruelty. How would they dare to rush to their deaths? On the other hand, Lu Zheng, speaking of which, they had not seen Lu Zheng for a long time. He did not appear even after such a huge incident had happened today. What was Lu Zheng doing? Some people said that his heart had been hurt by Enchui. Now that he had been frozen, he was disheartened and staying at home. Some people said that Lu Zheng had been suppressed by Hua Yuan and had fallen into depravity because he was bored. He was addicted to women and could not extricate himself. No one knew that Lu Zheng was addicted to his daughter and had no heart for proper business. In fact, before Jiang Pingji's troops had forcefully crossed Bailing River, he had a premonition. Outsiders did not understand her, but Lu Zheng knew her temperament. It was not difficult to deduce her actions based on her temperament and style. When the incident at Bailing River came, Lu Zheng's first reaction was to frown. Something was wrong. He could deduce this even when he was at home. There was no reason that Hua Yuan did not know about the mental illness. If he knew, why did he not warn Enchui in advance and send troops to guard against it? Lu Zheng felt uncomfortable all over when he thought of that lunatic Hua Yuan. Carry it first. Come back in 2 hours for a spot check. Lu Zheng assigned the homework casually and strode away. Kong Shintong held the heavy bamboo slips and recited them loudly without any complaints. Kong Shintong was born into an aristocratic family. Her biological father had also hired a teacher to teach her. This helped her build a solid foundation, so she learned quickly. Compared to Kong Shintong's enthusiasm for learning, Lu Jing did not have much energy in the following half a month. He even missed his lectures. Kong Shintong asked with concern, "What's wrong, godfather? Could it be that something troublesome has happened to you?" Lu Jing frowned and said, "The situation at the front line worries me. Hua Yuan seemed to have taken the wrong medicine again. Recently, he had been working but not putting in any effort. He had been slacking all day." Even Lu Jing could see his problem, but he pretended to be deaf and mute and chose to stand by. This abnormality made Lu Jing tense up. Chapter 1655. Compared to Lu Zhang's heaviness and worry, Kong Shintong's voice was much livelier. "I happened to overhear it. I heard that the Duke of Lanting's morale is very high." Lu Jing glanced at his adopted daughter indifferently and raised his hand to smack her forehead, telling her to watch her words. Kong Shintong was his adopted daughter after all. Why was she so excited when the enemy was mentioned? People who did not know better would think that Kong Shintong was Jiang Pingji's daughter. Kong Shintong's lips curled into a pretty smile. She was not afraid of Lu Zhang's warning at all. Perhaps it was because she had been eating and sleeping well these days, her originally thin chin had become rounder. She looked more and more likable. Seeing her smile, Lu Jing felt gratified and frowned at the same time. Even though he fed Kong Shintong chicken soup and told her that looks were innate and not to care too much, the reality was that reality had a natural malice towards good-looking women, especially in troubled times. A gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. No matter when, where, and who you are facing, you have to control your emotions. You can't be brash and give people the impression that you are frivolous and rude. Lu Jing taught his adopted daughter seriously. He sounded righteous and strict, but in fact, he had a lot of personal opinions. Kong Shintong looked like she was being taught, but she did not take it to heart. She had only smiled at her foster father just now. How was that frivolous, impolite, and reckless? Besides, father, a gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. Is this from the Analects of Confucius? Kong Shintong did have some basic knowledge, but the Analects of Confucius was too profound for her back then. The teacher that her parents hired had not even taught her that much. Recently, Lu Jing grabbed her to revise the Analects of Confucius, but Kong Shintong was still at the stage of rote memorization. Lu Jing said, "A gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. He will not be firm if he learns." The meaning of this sentence could be understood literally, but Kong Shintong, who had always been intelligent, was surprised. Lu Jing thought she did not understand and asked, "What do you not understand? Feel free to ask." Kong Shintong took out a roll of bamboo slips and opened it for Lu Jing to see. She pointed at the sentence on the bamboo slips. "According to my adoptive father, a gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious." Serious means sincere and solemn, but the note on the bamboo slips is not. Notes. The bamboo slips of the Analects of Confucius that Kong Shintong was currently using were the ones he had used when he was still a student. He had memorized every word on it by heart, so there was no need for him to flip through the bamboo slips again and again. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to teach Kong Shintong the Analects of Confucius, he wouldn't have taken out these bamboo slips. Although he hadn't read it for many years, he didn't remember what he had written on it. Bamboo slips were different from other materials. It was inconvenient to engrave words on them, and if one engraved too many words, it would shorten the lifespan of the bamboo slip. Because of his excellent memory, Lu Jing rarely engraved any annotations on it. He curiously took the bamboo slip from Kong Shintong's hand and opened it to take a look. He discovered that the words "a gentleman who is not heavy will not be imposing" next to the words "petty bourgeois." The heavier one was, the fatter one was Lu Zheng. In other words, according to the explanation, the meaning of this sentence was twisted into, if a gentleman is not fat, he is not dignified enough. Which bastard carved words on his bamboo slips? It was one thing to carve words, but wasn't he afraid that the saint wouldn't be able to hold him down if he explained it to the saint? Godfather, this annotation. Kong Shintong muttered softly, was it carved by Godfather? Lu Jing glanced at the handwriting and realized that it was somewhat familiar. He stared at it again and remembered who it was. No, it's impossible. Lu Jing denied it thrice. Kong Shintong knew how precious books were. Her godfather didn't come from a good family background, so he should cherish it more. If the person who engraved the words was not someone he trusted, he wouldn't have the chance to create trouble on it. Therefore, she was curious. Which deity had made such annotations? Who was it? Lu Jing threw the bamboo slip on the table and curled his lips. Who else could it be other than that foppish Lu Shi? That's right, the annotations were left behind by Jiang Pingji. Lu Jing didn't know the specific time, but it was most likely before he left Langya County. Kong Shintong's little mouth opened slightly. She was stunned for a while, then she suddenly burst into laughter. The Duke of Lanting actually had such a cute and mischievous side when he was young. The expressionless Lu Jing. Shouldn't a normal person's first reaction upon seeing such a ridiculous annotation be to say that Jiang Pingji was a bad student? But the person. Mischievous. What kind of description was that? She wasn't a fan filter. She was obviously blind. Lu Jing suddenly felt a little remorseful. Did he overcorrect his goddaughter? She was his goddaughter, but she was a fan of Jiang Pingji. That was too much. Humph. Lu Jing snorted in disdain. He took out a knife and a brush from his sleeve, ready to scrape away the nonsense Jiang Pingji had left behind. Unexpectedly, Kong Shintong refused. She grabbed the bamboo slip and hugged it in her arms. Her face was full of expectation, and her eyes were pleading. Let me translate, these were the words personally engraved by her idol. She had to keep them and not scrape them off. Lu Jing held the knife and brush in his hand. He didn't know whether to take them or put them away. Kong Shintong took advantage of Lu Zhang's hesitation and hid the bamboo slip behind her. She changed the topic abruptly. Godfather, the situation at the front line isn't optimistic. Don't the others have any countermeasures? Lu Zhang was silent for a while. He quietly put away the knife and brush and resumed his serious expression. There are countermeasures. Although the people under the Lord's command have their own agendas, not all of them are mediocre. If that's the case, why are you so worried? If they have countermeasures, they naturally have the ability to solve it. Kong Shintong spoke rather bluntly. She had been with Lu Jing for a long time and had a deeper understanding of him. This godfather was good in every way, but Enchui had eyes but failed to see and sheltered him. Why didn't Enchui think about how her godfather had accompanied him through his lowest times? What was the difference between him and a scumbag who abandoned his wife when he struck it rich? Trash. Pig trotters. Kong Shintong didn't like Enchui. She couldn't wait for him to die. Lu Jing said, I'm afraid that someone has the ambition of a wolf. I don't know what evil plans they have in the dark. Kong Shintong didn't understand. Will the people under Lord Enchui's command harm him? Lu Jing sneered. Why not? Some people have lost their minds and gone mad. They can't be treated as normal people. If that's the case, will you remind Lord Enchui? Kong Shintong asked carefully. Lu Jing sneered. Remind. Ha! It was useless to remind him. Lu Jing wasn't someone who liked to pester others. He was already disgusted by Enchui's repeated suicidal acts. 2 days after this conversation, Enchui gathered the army and prepared to set off. Lu Jing, the background, was dragged along as well. Enchui thought of Lu Jing, not because he still had a conscience and cherished old friendships, but because of Hua Yuan's recommendation. No scumbag would think of himself as scumbag, much less think that neglecting someone else was his fault. What else could Lu Jing be dissatisfied with if Enchui was willing to put Lu Jing in an important position again? In order to maintain this scumbag mentality, Enchui had planned to have Lu Jing guard the rear. In the end, this decision was sternly rejected by Hua Yuan. For Enchui to leave a great talent like Lu Jing behind in the rear was simply a reckless waste of God's gift. What does Hua Yuan want to do? What does he want to do? Hua Yuan sneered. Chapter 1656. Is Godfather going to follow the army into battle? Kong Xintong had been living in Lu Zhang's residence for a while now, and their relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. When she saw Lu Zhang instruct the housekeeper to pack his luggage with a grave expression, she knew that something had happened outside. She heard that the front line was extremely dangerous, and her godfather had been neglected by Enchui for a long time. She didn't know why he was suddenly put in an important position. Hua Yuan recommended me to the Lord, so she ordered me to follow the army into battle. Stay at home and wait for me to return. You mustn't neglect your studies when I'm not home. You'll be tested when I return. Lu Jing didn't have experience as a teacher, but he had experience as a student. His master, Master Yuan Jing, had taught his students in the same way back then. There was a limit to how much he could relax. Even though Kong Xintong was a self-disciplined, studious, and practical child, she was still a teenager. Her self-control wasn't as good as an adult's, and it was easy for her to be distracted by the flowers and plants of the outside world. Lu Jing was worried that Kong Xintong would neglect her studies when he wasn't around. I will remember Godfather's teachings. Kong Xintong agreed, but she asked in confusion, it's a good thing that Lord Enchui put you in an important position again. Why does Godfather look so preoccupied? Is it because of Master Hua Yuan's recommendation? She had vaguely heard servants mention that her godfather and Hua Yuan didn't get along. However, her godfather didn't admit it himself, so Kong Xintong couldn't discuss it in private. I have some conflicts with him, and we've never been on good terms. Lu Jing didn't avoid the topic and said directly, as the saying goes, there must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. He's not a kind-hearted person. Who knew if his expression of goodwill was genuine or just another scheme? I'm worried that he's up to something again, so I have to be on guard. However, the Lord trusts him so much that I can't do anything to him. The conflict between Hua Yuan and Lu Jing was well known. He had been suppressing Lu Jing both openly and secretly, so how could he give him a chance to turn things around? He was afraid that there was some kind of conspiracy, such as luring the tiger away from the mountain and taking advantage of LV Jing going to the front line to stir up trouble in the rear, or that there was some kind of trap waiting for LV Jing to jump into at the front line, or that there was some kind of conspiracy at the front line. All of these were possible. Even though LV Zhang's suspicions were very reasonable and well-founded, it also proved one thing: Hua Yuan, a dangerous individual with a split personality, had left a deep psychological shadow on him, so much so that LV Zhang was a little paranoid and always had a conspiracy theory about everything. When Kong Xintong heard this, she had a bold idea. Your daughter has a matter that I hope Godfather will agree to. She swallowed nervously and said tentatively, it's already unfilial of me to not share my father's burden when he's with the army. I don't dare to let him worry about me when he's at the front. If that's the case, why don't you? Under Lu Zhang's stern gaze, Kong Shintong's voice gradually became softer and softer until it could not be heard. Her little head also drooped down. Why not what? Why didn't you say anything? Lu Zhang asked with a spurious smile. His eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's heart were filled with understanding. You don't dare to say it. Then let me guess and see if I've guessed what you're thinking. Do you want to follow the army to the front? Even if Kong Shintong's idol was Jiang Pingji, he couldn't be so bold if he wanted to imitate his idol, could he? Jiang Pingji had a sizable female battalion under her command. Over the years, they had risen to fame and made a name for themselves, making their enemies tremble in fear. However, Enchui did not have such conditions. Kong Shintong was a girl. If LV Jing did not take good care of her, who knew when something would happen to her? The front line was full of swords and sabers. It was too dangerous. I advise you to give up on this idea as soon as possible. LV Jing quite liked this clever and obedient adopted daughter. How could he bear to let her go to the front line and court death? At the end of the day, it was Lu Lanting's fault. He did not teach good things and taught bad things to children. LV Jing smiled in his heart and patted the little man. The two words, Lu Shi, were written on the man's body. His black resentment was almost overflowing. Her foster father's rejection was within Kong Shintong's expectations. She gave a fawning smile, got up from the mat, and went behind LV Jing. She rubbed his shoulders attentively and said softly, "Foster father, you are indeed my foster father. I can't hide my cleverness from you." Humph, carrot, it was useless even if the little girl had a sweet mouth. LV Jing did not fall for it verbally, but he enjoyed it in his heart. The front line is very dangerous. There's chaos everywhere. If you're not careful, you'll lose your life. It's for your own good that I'm not letting you go. Moreover, the army camp is not as simple as you think. There are a bunch of rough and barbaric men there. I dare not guarantee your safety. You're a delicate girl. You'll easily get into trouble if you go. LV Jing tried to dispel her thoughts. His idol was so arrogant because he had the ability to survive at the front line. That person could enter an army of thousands without batting an eyelid. She did not have the ability to do so, so she did not want to die. Of course, Kong Shintong's courage was worthy of recognition. Ordinary girls would not have the courage to say that they wanted to go to the front line. Kong Shintong's expression darkened when LV Jing saw through her thoughts. She immediately became determined and her eyes were filled with determination. She really wanted to go to the front line. How could she grow faster by staying in the rear and enjoying the protection of a greenhouse? She was not afraid even if she might face the dangers that LV Jing mentioned. She also wanted to see how big the world was as LV Jing had said. She immediately begged LV Jing, "Godfather, you're always thinking of me. I'm afraid that I'll let you down. What's so good about the front line that it's worth all of you going there? Don't you know that people will die? Other than me, there's someone else like you." LV Jing said, "Isn't Lu Shi the one who taught you bad things?" "Humph, the culprit of all conflicts." Kong Shintong said seriously, "Godfather, I've always remembered what you told me. However, reading 10,000 books is not as good as walking 10,000 miles. No matter how much I read, it's still not as good as seeing with my own eyes. I'm short-sighted, so I naturally have to see more." LV Jing sighed helplessly. He raised his hand and pulled Kong Shintong up, making her kneel on the ground look unbecoming. "You can go, but you have to promise me that your own safety is the most important." If she went to the front line, LV Jing could not guarantee Kong Shintong's safety. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, she would have to bear it herself. Since Kong Shintong was so persistent, LV Jing could not force her. Of course, if his own flesh and blood disobeyed him like this, he would probably explode and break their legs. Kang Shintong did not expect Jing to be so easy to talk to. She was already prepared to be rejected for the second time. Thus, when Jing agreed, she almost did not react in time. When she came back to her senses, she quickly said, "Thank you, Godfather." Chapter 1657. Jing made it sound serious, but in fact, it was not that dangerous. Kang Shintong was young to begin with, so it was not out of place for her to disguise as a man. Jing also ordered people to keep an eye on her at all times. As long as Kang Shintong did not seek death and go to places she should not go, she would not be in any danger in the military camp. Unless the enemy directly launched a sneak attack on our camp, then there was nothing we could do. Moreover, Jing was a strategist, not a general. He spent most of his time in the barracks, so he could definitely protect this little girl. Jing did not hide Kang Shintong's matter from Enchui and informed him in advance. Enchui had vaguely heard that Jing had adopted a daughter, but he did not expect that he would bring her to the military camp. "Take it with you, as long as it doesn't interfere with important matters." Enchui had no objections, so the matter was settled. The army set off. Jing followed Enchui on horseback, but Hua Yuan was nowhere to be seen. Seeing this, Jing felt even more uneasy. He pretended to casually ask the people around him about Hua Yuan's whereabouts. "Why don't I see Hua Yuan?" Jing whispered to a strategist he was on good terms with. His eyes were still wandering around, trying to find a familiar figure. He said, "The Lord can't leave the flower abyss. He can't wait to take her wherever he goes. Why can't I see her today?" The other party asked, "You don't know?" Jing shook his head. "I really don't know." The other party continued, "This time, the enemy is coming in full force, but Lu Shi still sent out his troops despite the spring plowing. It's obvious that he's made up his mind. If we want to defend against the enemy, we don't know how long this battle will take. I'm afraid we won't have enough rations. The Lord has sent Hua Yuan to collect military provisions and supplies." Jing's heart skipped a beat. "Is there not enough food? How much rations do we have? How long can it support the army?" Jing had gradually become disconnected from political affairs during his time in the cold. His understanding of the military camp had fallen behind. "Roughly speaking, we should be able to last until early winter." "Why is it only early winter?" According to Jing's estimation, the provisions they had in reserve could last them until the end of spring and the beginning of summer next year. Of course, it wouldn't matter even if he couldn't hold on. Rations were precious in any period of time, not to mention in this chaotic world where rations were the hard currency. If there really was a food shortage, not only would they have to think of ways to increase income, but they would also have to do their best to reduce expenditure. If there was no other choice, then he could only use special methods to get through this difficult period of time. Even so, Jing still felt that Enchui and Hua Yuan were too wasteful. During the days when he was frozen, the two of them were quite extravagant. They were like the foolish sons of a landlord. The more foolish people have, the faster the money comes. The foundation that Jing had accumulated over the years was going to be destroyed by them. He had a rough idea in his heart, but he didn't expect the truth to be worlds apart from his conjecture. "We should have been able to last longer. After all, our army benefited a lot from the incident last year." But, all these years, Lu Shi had swept through the lands, hadn't he relied on the elites under his command? Now that the army was at the borders, the Lord was extremely fearful of her. She was afraid that the army would not be strong enough, so she had been recruiting soldiers and training elites. Last year, the Lord sent people to select 150,000 strong youths from the two prefectures and send them to the military camp. 150,000. Lu Zheng's voice almost cracked. Was he hallucinating? Are you sure it's 150,000, not 15,000? This is simply nonsense. Lu Zheng didn't care that Enchui was not far away. He widened his eyes and scolded them. Not only were Enchui and Hua Yuan prodigal sons, but they were also kicked in the head by a donkey. How could there be such a good thing in this world? One wanted the horse to run fast, but also wanted the horse to eat less and drink less. These youths were all mouths that were crying piteously for food. They ate grains. They were neither wooden oxen nor immortals. They couldn't eat wind and drink dew. If they were trained as elites, their daily meals would be at least twice as much as that of ordinary soldiers. There were so many mouths to feed all of a sudden. Did Enchui really think that food didn't need money? The incident last year that he mentioned was referring to the incident where Enchui fortified the walls and cleared the fields to trick Jiang Pingji last year. He took all the benefits for himself and plundered the food reserves of the two prefectures. In the end, he threw a group of old, weak, sick, and disabled people to Jiang Pingji and made her worry about food. In Lu Zheng's opinion, Enchui shouldn't have wanted those youths last year. It would have been enough to just plunder the food reserves. He should have thrown the youths, the weak, the sick, and the disabled to Jiang Pingji, making her worry about food. If she could solve it, she would be considered capable. If she couldn't, she could send someone to secretly instigate the youths to revolt and attack the granary to snatch food. It would also be a good opportunity for Lu Zheng to see Jiang Pingji being pressured into a terrible state. It was a pity that Enchui refused to listen. He had already been bewitched by Hua Yuan, the little b****. 150,000 more mouths to feed out of thin air. How will there be enough food for our army? Enchui had previously annexed the various feudal lords of Nanxing and absorbed their military forces. The number of troops under his command was already very large. The youths from the two prefectures that had just been absorbed had no combat experience. They were only there to wave the flag and shout battle cries, and at the same time, they were also there to give the enemy heads an experience. However, Hua Yuan wanted to challenge Lu Zheng to a duel. Due to various disadvantages, Lu Zheng couldn't defeat him. His master, Enchui, was also greedy and couldn't bear to part with the youths. He was afraid that these youths would become Jiang Pingji's daggers against him, so he insisted on taking them home and digesting them himself. Look, now you know the consequences of being too greedy and inconsiderate, right? You've lifted a rock and dropped it on your own feet. Lu Zheng felt a little stuffy in his chest, as if someone had stabbed him with a knife. His lord, Enchui, used to be so reliable. Why did he become so arrogant after he became rich? He could be arrogant if he wanted to, but he should at least wait until the dust settled on the enemy, right? The enemy hadn't even knelt down, yet he was the first to lose his cool. Was he planning to give his head to Jiang Pingji? Lu Zheng cursed in his heart, but he didn't know if he should say it. Lower your voice. Do you want to die? The man tugged at Lu Zheng's sleeve and warned him in a low voice. He secretly raised his head and glanced in Enchui's direction. He realized that Enchui was looking in his direction. His pitch-black eyes were devoid of any emotion. Under such a gaze, he couldn't help but shiver. He quickly lowered his head to avoid eye contact. Lu Zheng tightened his grip on the reins and snorted coldly in a low voice. It's time for you to change your personality. It's not like you don't know the Lord's temperament. If you insist on being stubborn, you'll be the one who suffers. The onlooker sees the game more clearly than the person directly involved. Why was Enchui close to Hua Yuan and distant from Lu Zheng? It wasn't because Lu Zheng wasn't capable enough. It was clearly because Lu Zheng's temperament had made his lord, Enchui, unhappy for a long time. He felt that, Lu Zheng might be put in a difficult position again. As it turned out, and Shui wasn't as petty as he thought. Indeed, he didn't like Lu Zheng, but he wouldn't ignore the bigger picture and leave such a capable person like Lu Zheng to rot in a corner. Now was the time to use people. Lu Zheng still had to use him when he needed to. Chapter 1658. It was the 6th year of Taikang. It was a chilly spring. Spring had arrived in the south of Yonghua, but the northern border was still snowing. The snow was up to his ankles. Nia Yang thought that after death, his soul would return to the netherworld. He would walk on the bridge of helplessness, drink Meng Po's soup, forget the past, and be reborn. In the end, he was still too young. Nia Yang was the legitimate son of the Nia family's third branch. Although he was not valued by his elders, he was well-dressed and had never suffered. He was sent to Jiangpingji by Nia Qing to die. He only had time to say his last words before he was decapitated. He felt a chill on his neck. After some time, he regained consciousness. Not only was his neck cold, but his limbs were even colder. It was as if he was in an ice cave. He struggled to open his eyes and saw the broken roof of the house. When he turned his eyes, he saw that the room was pitch black. Nia Yang was shocked. He was surprised that hell was like this. He used all his strength to push himself up from the bed. He was shocked. Underneath him was a bed made of dried grass and firewood. His body was covered with something black and smelly. His hands, which were exposed from his sleeves, were cracked and frostbitten. Not only that, but he also found that his feet were bare. His ankles and soles were blue from the cold. Could it be that Lord Lanting was so stingy that he didn't even leave clothes for me? Nia Yang murmured. As soon as he said it, he was shocked by his own voice. In his previous life, Nia Yang's voice was not as elegant as Nia Qing's, but it was full of youthful vigor. What about now? He sounded like he was about 6 or 7 years old. Although his voice was hoarse, it could not hide his childishness. At that moment, Nia Yang realized that his limbs had shrunk. He used all his strength to get up. From the corner of his eyes, he saw white snow outside the broken window. He could vaguely see well-dressed people walking by. Nia Yang was at a loss for a while. He panicked and realized that the situation was different from what he had imagined. Could it be, this isn't hell? When Nia Yang tried to go out, he felt a sharp pain in his head. An unfamiliar and slightly blurry memory filled his brain. It really isn't hell. After a long while, Nia Yang revealed a shocked and panicked expression. He looked like he was about to cry, but he wasn't. He was at a loss. Nia Yang died at the hands of Jiangpingji. After his death, his soul did not return to the underworld. Instead, he was reborn in a completely unfamiliar dynasty. This body was that of a beggar. His parents died of famine, and he relied on stealing and the support of kind-hearted people to survive. Life was so difficult. The child beggar tried his best to survive, but he was still frozen to death by the sudden snowfall last night. When he woke up again, his inner core had become Nia Yang. Of course, he was happy to be reborn, but in this situation, he might as well die. Nia Yang sneered, "You've done so much evil in your life, but you still have a chance to start over." Ha, this God, he really didn't know if God was treating him well or torturing him on purpose. This body was that of an orphan with no parents, no name, and no family. He was penniless and had no home. He was frozen to death in this broken temple. The people nearby called him dog and the children called him fool. With such a terrible life, if he didn't have the opportunity, he would probably never be able to turn over a new leaf. Nia Yang was, after all, an ancient person. His thinking was more inclined to believe that this beggar was actually his reincarnation. But for some reason, the soup of Mingpa didn't work, and it made him remember his previous life. According to this line of thinking, his current life situation could be explained. He had done so much evil in his previous life, so there was no glory or wealth in his next life. He could only live a poor life. Nia Yang's lips curled into a somewhat mocking sneer. In his previous life, he had been born into a gentry family and was the son of a respectable noble family. Now, he was a beggar. Even if he worked hard, at most he would be ranked among the poor, and people would look down on him. Thinking about it this way, he felt indignant. However, it was too early to think about this. He had to solve the problem of food and warmth first. Nia Yang thought about it and followed his memory to the only private school near the village. The examination system in this world was not quite the same as the evaluation system he knew. It was the imperial examination to select scholars. The form of the imperial examination was somewhat similar to the teaching and promotion system implemented by the Duke of Lanting in Wanzhou. However, fortunately, it was the imperial examination and not the evaluation system. Otherwise, Nia Yang would never be able to climb up in this lifetime. The evaluation of scholars was based on family background and appearance. Talent was actually secondary. Nia Yang's identity in this life was only a beggar. He couldn't even be considered poor. Just based on his family background, he would forever be rejected from officialdom. He still had a chance in the imperial examination to select scholars. Nia Yang endured the cold and hunger and secretly peeked outside the window of the private school. He caught a glimpse of the content of the teacher's lecture and felt a bit more satisfied. Although the history of this dynasty was very different from what he knew, the characters in both were the same. Nia Yang didn't have to be illiterate anymore. The private school teacher also noticed the beggar outside the window but didn't pay much attention. This beggar often came over to pick up the students' leftovers. He looked very pitiful, so the teacher would occasionally soften his heart and give him alms. The teacher randomly tested a few students on yesterday's homework. Every student stuttered, which made him very disappointed. At this time, he heard a murmur outside the window. He listened carefully and didn't miss a single word. He looked again and saw that it was the beggar. "Do you know how to recite?" the teacher asked. Nia Yang was secretly happy, but he said, "I remember everything just now." The teacher was slightly surprised and asked with interest, "Then what else can you recite?" Nia Yang opened his mouth and recited the few analects of Confucius that the teacher said today. It was strange that Confucius and Mencius were still alive in a strange dynasty. "How stubborn." The teacher murmured, "How smart." What a pity. If he had money to go to school and receive education, he might even be able to pass the imperial examination. Unfortunately, he was a beggar who didn't know his next meal. No matter how talented he was, it would only be a waste. Nia Yang showed his doubts and asked the teacher about his confusion about one of the analects of Confucius. The teacher smiled indifferently. "What confusion can you have?" It was good enough that he could recite it word for word. How could he have his own opinion? If it was the previous beggar, he probably couldn't. But Nia Yang was different. In terms of talent and learning, 10 teachers together might not be a match for Nia Yang. Why? Nia Yang was born in a noble family in his previous life. The educational resources in front of Nia Yang were the best at that time. He received an elite education and never lacked writing brushes, ink, and paper. The teachers were all famous scholars and he could read the rare books of the poor. Not to mention that Nia Yang was talented, even if he was stupid, with so many educational resources, he would be much better than the ordinary poor. The teacher in front of him had studied hard for more than 10 years and failed several provincial examinations. He was discouraged and came back to teach. Nia Yang's acting skills were beyond doubt. Even if he was at a disadvantage, he could still create the most suitable opportunity. The teacher was shocked after hearing this. Nia Yang said again, "I can do all kinds of dirty and tiring work. Teacher, please do me a favor and give me something to eat." The teacher frowned. This is not a charity hole. Although he didn't look down on Nia Yang, the strong sarcasm in his words could be heard by anyone who wasn't deaf. Nia Yang had always been a smiling tiger in his previous life. All his emotions were hidden deep in his heart and no one could see them. He knew how to prioritize things. Right now, survival was the most important thing, and he could still endure this little bit of setback. Although I'm not talented, I know shame. Nia Yang lowered his posture and said word by word, "If you have any work like copying and engraving, I can do it. It's so cold now. If I don't find a way out, I'm afraid I won't be able to survive until spring." Nia Yang had a good eye for people and the teacher in front of him had a good reputation in the surrounding villages. He could play the emotional card. Sure enough, the teacher heard Nia Yang's words and asked him, "You can copy and engrave?" Nia Yang nodded and showed his two frostbitten hands. He said awkwardly, "I can write. I used to secretly watch the teacher teach and practiced with a branch for a long time. But my hands are a little hard from the cold. If I write with a pen, I'm afraid it won't look good." The teacher looked down at Nia Yang's hands. They were almost black from the cold. The cracks and frostbites made people feel sorry for him. Thinking of this, he felt pity for him. If this child could really copy well, it would be fine to give him some food to eat. Words were no proof. Even if the teacher was a kind person, he would not believe Nia Yang's words. He still had to test his handwriting. The teacher did not think that a child who had not gone through systematic learning could write well. Nia Yang felt relieved when he saw the teacher's attitude soften. He endured the pain and washed the stains off his hands and arms with ice and snow. Then he rolled up his sleeves and started writing so that the table, paper and pen would not be dirted. Nia Yang's attitude was sincere and kind. The teacher liked him a lot. Nia Yang's handwriting was good. After all, he was a student of a famous calligrapher. It was just that he had changed his body and his wrist strength was not good enough. He could not write as well as he did in his previous life. Even so, the teacher was still shocked. Nia Yang was from an aristocratic family. He was best at writing two types of characters. One was the popular 1T in Zhongzhou, and the other was the MOT. These two types of characters were created by Zhongzhou's modern calligrapher. The person who created the 1T was a woman from an aristocratic family. At that time, the four self-accomplishment classics for women had not been created. Women from aristocratic families had a high status. This lady's handwriting was charming and graceful. Many noble ladies followed her example. Many young aristocratic families who pursued fashion also liked to copy and learn. Nia Yang was also a fan. His 1T was more charming than many women's. The calligrapher who created the MOT was Nia Yang's teacher. At the same time, it was also the character that Nia Yang wrote the most. This type of character was famous for being thick, square, and clear. Nia Yang studied the MOT to hide his true nature. After all, people said, calligraphy is like the person. One could see a person's nature through his calligraphy. Reality proved that this was nonsense. Nia Yang had learned 70% of his teacher's MOT. Outsiders thought that he was a gentleman. Who knew that he was a scheming villain? At this time, the calligraphy was naturally Nia Yang's best MOT. Did you really practice it yourself? The headmaster looked at Nia Yang with a complicated expression. He did not know that this beggar had such a talent. He had almost been buried. Nia Yang nodded and twisted his fingers pitifully. He said pitifully, I beg the headmaster of the academy to do me a favor and let me have a meal. The headmaster sighed. Forget it. I'll leave the copying and engraving to you. 2 meals a day. Is that okay? Nia Yang smiled. Thank you, headmaster. If I have a chance in the future, I will not forget your kindness. A chance in the future. The headmaster smiled and waved his hand. It's not that simple. Take care of yourself first. Why did Nia Yang set the private school as his goal? Because he needed a way out. He was not willing to be an ordinary person. If he did not work hard to find a way out, would he freeze to death or starve to death in the ruined temple? The private school had some books. Nia Yang helped here. He could read the books and understand the details of this era. He could also solve the problem of food and clothing. He looked at the rice paper on the table and sighed in his heart. Although there was paper in his previous life, it was very precious and produced in small quantities. Many small gentry families could only use thick bamboo slips to carve words. At this moment, even a scholar from a poor family who taught in a private school could use such uniform and fine paper. It could be seen that the overall standard of this era was much better than in his previous life. His hands and feet were itchy and painful from frostbite, but Nia Yang did not seem to feel it. He began to copy as usual. At first, he was not used to it. After a whole afternoon, he was much faster. After a while, the headmaster brought him a set of clothes that had been washed white. There were 2 wooden boxes on the clothes. You can wear this set of clothes. There is also some ointment for frostbite. The headmaster asked him, do you have a place to stay? I'm living in a ruined temple 3 miles away. That ruined temple is drafty. What's the difference between living there and living in the open? The headmaster frowned. A ruined temple could not keep out the wind and rain. Living there would be courting death. If you don't mind, you can stay in the woodshed. We'll decide when the weather gets warmer. Nia Yang's eyes showed gratitude. He said sincerely, thank you, headmaster. From that day on, Nia Yang lived in the woodshed of the private school peacefully. During the day, he diligently copied the books that the headmaster borrowed from everywhere. At the same time, he secretly recorded the contents of the books. The headmaster provided 2 meals a day, but the portions were always sufficient. Unknowingly, it was March. One day, school ended. The headmaster went to the town to run some errands. Nia Yang did not have any tasks, so he lay in the corridor and took a light nap. When he opened his eyes, the sky was already red. The headmaster sat beside him and looked at him. You've been here for more than a month, but I still don't know your name. Nia Yang said, my surname is Nia, and my first name is Yang. His parents died early in this life and they did not have time to choose a name. Nia Yang did not know their surnames, so he simply used the surnames of his previous life. Nia Yang. There are many Westerners. The river is vast, and it flows northward. The headmaster smiled. It's a wonderful scene. After a pause, the headmaster asked him, do you have any other family members? Nia Yang was startled and shook his head. No. He was already alone and deserted by everyone. How could he have any other family members? When I heard you murmuring Enchanting in your dream, I thought it was your living relative. The headmaster said regretfully, you're very talented. If your family is willing to support you in your studies, you can still have a future in the officialdom. Even if you don't bring glory to your ancestors, at least you won't have to worry about food and clothing. When the headmaster said the 2 words, Enchanting, Nia Yang's face turned completely white, without any color. Ever since he woke up, he had been busy making a living. In the dead of night, he restrained himself from thinking about his previous life. Who would have thought that he was actually talking in his sleep? What's wrong? Do you feel uncomfortable? Thank you for your concern, headmaster. I'm fine. It's just that I suddenly thought of my cousin and felt very sad. Chapter 1659. Spring left and autumn came, and winter and summer changed seasons. On the outside, Nia Yang looked like a young child, but on the inside, he was an adult with deep schemes. He helped the headmaster manage the private school while absorbing the knowledge of this era like a whale sucking in a dragon. The headmaster saw it but did not stop him. He even gave Nia Yang some advice occasionally. In his eyes, Nia Yang was destined to be an extraordinary person. If he had a good future, he would also benefit. When Nia Yang was 10 years old, the headmaster suggested him to try his luck by participating in the county-level exam. The county-level exam was divided into 3 stages: the county exam, and the academy exam. If he passed, he would receive food from the government every month. Even if he could not go further, he would still be much better than an ordinary person. Nia Yang said humbly, "I don't have a good foundation. I'm afraid I won't pass." The headmaster said, "The county-level exam is not as difficult as you think. With your current foundation, you should be able to pass." Participating in the county-level exam required complicated procedures. The headmaster told him to focus on his revision and ran around to complete all the procedures. Nia Yang watched from the side with an indescribable sense of melancholy. Whether it was Nia Qing or this teacher, they did not know what kind of bullshit the real Nia Yang was. The headmaster lent Nia Yang some money and gave him a lift to participate in the county-level exam. As the headmaster expected, the county-level exam was not difficult. It was not a challenge for Nia Yang at all. He passed the first exam and became a gifted student. At the same time, he became the youngest in that year and was known as a genius. Nia Yang's life improved a lot since he was a gifted student. He stayed in the private school to make a living and spent more time studying every day. After preparing for the exam for several years, Nia Yang took the autumn county exam at the age of 16 and passed the top scorer. Then he took the spring exam and passed the top scorer. He performed very well in the palace exam and the emperor wanted to help him pass 3 top scorers in a row. Thus, Nia Yang was promoted to the top scorer. He passed 3 top scorers in a row before he was 20. Suddenly, Nia Yang's social status rose and many people tried to rope him in. Outsiders all thought that Nia Yang would become arrogant because of this. Who would have thought that this little Zhuang Yuan would be able to keep his composure and conduct himself with the demeanor of a great family? If he was thrown into the crowd of nobles in the capital, just by looking at his temperament, it would be hard to tell that Nia Yang was once a beggar. He would look more like a naturally born rich noble. Nia Yang didn't get carried away because he knew very well that being the top scholar was only an entrance ticket to the officialdom, not a ticket to the finish line. How high he could climb in the future and how much power he could control all depended on his future management. At the Jasper Forest banquet, many people wanted to see what this Zhuang Yuan, who had yet to reach the age of 20, looked like. Nia Yang wore a clear and harmless smile on his face as he walked among the nobles with ease. His every movement didn't seem like that of a bookworm who had studied hard, but more like that of an experienced official. Before the court examinations, Nia Yang had tried his best to gather information about the situation in the court. The current emperor's surname was Nia. He was 32 years old when he ascended the throne in the first year of Taikang. He had 5 sons and 3 daughters. The first 4 princes had already reached adulthood. Only the 5th prince, who was also the crown prince born by Empress Yuan, had yet to reach adulthood. Counting them, he was half a year older than Nie Yang. A few years ago, Empress Yuan had died of illness. The emperor had the intention of suppressing Empress Yuan's paternal family, the Duke of Zhenghe. In addition, the four older princes had entered the court one after another after coming of age. There was a faint tendency to surround and attack the crown prince. The crown prince was only the heir to the throne of the empire. His privileges were only one level lower than the emperor's. However, he was still not the emperor and his life was in danger. Nie Yang had a faint smile on his face. In his heart, he was calculating which prince had the upper hand. However, his calculation still fell through when he heard the name of the crown prince. Nie Qing, it was actually Nie Qing. Nie Yang was very surprised. His hand trembled and wine spilled out. After the Jasper Forest banquet began, the emperor, the crown prince, and the other four princes appeared one after another. Nie Yang's expression changed over and over again. There was no other reason. The crown prince's face, figure, manner of speech, and temperament were almost identical to his cousin Nie Qing from his previous life. The difference was that his cousin Nie Qing was a bright and elegant scholar. Like the bright moon, he always had a faint smile on his lips. His every move was a role model for nobles. The crown prince in front of him was indeed similar, but there was a faint hint of melancholy between his brows. Nie Yang suppressed his wildly beating heart and kept his breathing steady. However, he could not bear to look away from the crown prince. Why were they so similar? Could it be that the crown prince was the reincarnation of his cousin Nie Qing? That was also possible. Nie Qing was born rich and did not do evil. It was reasonable for him to be reincarnated into the imperial family and become the crown prince. Nie Yang swallowed nervously. His hands hidden in his sleeves were sweating profusely. His fingers were almost twisted into a bowl. Cousin, Nie Yang murmured, his eyes welling up with tears. The others only thought that he was young and could not hold his liquor. After a few teasing words, they turned their attention to the ranking Ai and Tanhua. In the middle of the Jasper Forest banquet, Nie Yang caught a glimpse of the crown prince getting up to leave. He found an excuse to follow, but was blocked by someone. Why is the top scholar here? The crown prince revealed a suspicious look, but the vigilance in his eyes made Nie Yang instantly sober. He was not Nie Qing. No, it should be said that he was not the Nie Qing he knew. Nie Yang's heart raced, but he showed an embarrassed expression. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I can't hold my liquor. I drank a little too much just now, but I couldn't find a place to change, so I couldn't ask, so, Your Highness, please forgive me for my lack of manners." The crown prince's expression eased. This was also Nie Yang's fault for looking so harmless that people could not raise their guard. Perhaps it was an ill-fated fate, but Nie Yang looked exactly the same in this life as in his previous life. He naturally knew how to show his harmless side. The crown prince's expression eased after hearing this, and he called for a palace maid to lead the way for Nie Yang. As Nie Yang watched him leave, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. He owed so much in his previous life, could he pay it all back in this life? After the Jasper Forest banquet, Nie Yang was appointed to the Hanlin Academy as a secondary class 6th rank. He was in charge of the nation's history, compiling records, and recording the emperor's words and deeds. Simply put, he was a secretary. This position was considered a high starting point for Nie Yang, who had a poor background. If he did not work hard, he would probably squat in this position for the rest of his life. If he did well and won the emperor's favor, then the role and power of this position would not be small. In fact, there were records of top scholars in the past who were secondary class 6th rank for their entire lives. The imperial examinations were just a ticket. After entering this officialdom, how high one could climb in the end depended on one's own ability. Nie Yang smiled and narrowed his eyes, not worried about his future at all. Even though Nie Qing said his temperament was not good, he had to admit that only people with this kind of temperament could do well in the officialdom. In comparison, he was more concerned about the crown prince. Nie Qing, Nie Yang murmured, a trace of determination flashing in his eyes. Regardless of whether this crown prince was the reincarnation of his cousin, he had to help him ascend to the throne. This way, perhaps they would not owe each other anything. Nie Yang's temperament was born for officialdom. In other words, he was born for this bowl of rice. In just half a year, he had seen through the emperor's thoughts and became a trusted official of the emperor. His future was limitless. The nobles in the court tried to rope in this new noble, and the 4 adult princes also tried to extend an olive branch to him. Nie Yang did not refuse, nor did he give a definite answer. He obediently did his job. Because he had become a Hanlin Academy scholar, Nie Yang and the crown prince had more opportunities to meet. Because they were close in age, they had more topics to talk about than others, and they could occasionally talk. After some contact, Nie Yang had a deeper understanding of the crown prince's position. In short, it was not optimistic. Empress Yuan was dead, his mother's family was continuously suppressed, the 4 older royal brothers were pressuring him step by step, and the emperor's attitude towards the crown prince was becoming more and more ambiguous. In such a situation where he was besieged on all sides, not to mention this crown prince, anyone else would be forced to become irritable. Nie Yang waited for the crown prince to recruit him, but after waiting for half a year, the crown prince did not even let out a fart. He really could not wait any longer, so Nie Yang took the initiative to attack, hinting that there was a problem with Nie Qing's camp. The crown prince was dazed for a moment, then smiled warmly. I heard that Zhong Yi had refused 4 royal brothers in succession. This solitude was curious and guessed that Zhong Yi had other plans, such as wholeheartedly loyal to imperial father. I did not expect that Zhong Yi would like this solitude. This solitude's current situation will disappoint you. The crown prince was the heir to the throne and was outstanding in all aspects. In Nie Yang's view, he was no different from his own cousin. If not for the surrounding scene reminding him, he would have thought that the 2 of them had returned to their previous life. Nie Yang's heart moved slightly. He had not thought that the crown prince would be so clear about his situation. Since it was so, why didn't he think of a way to save himself? In Nie Yang's view, the crown prince's recent attitude was somewhat passive. Your Highness's words are incorrect. You are the crown prince, the legitimate son of Empress Yuan, the heir to the throne, the rightful successor. Nie Yang said word by word, as long as your Highness is patient and wholeheartedly serves the emperor, father, the court, and the people, how can the 4 princes surpass you? This was not passive resistance, this was called not changing, not fighting was fighting. Nie Qing's heart surged with waves of warmth, his eyes filled with rare sincerity. Grand Tutor, Grandfather and the others also said similar things, but at that time, this solitude felt distraught and did not listen. When Zhong Yi said these words, this solitude had a different experience. When the crown prince met his gaze, he felt an indescribable sense of familiarity. He had not been in frequent contact with this Hanlin Academy cultivator, but he unconsciously trusted the other, as if they were old friends from a previous life. If your Highness pays attention to the fight for the throne, you will be at a disadvantage. Nie Yang said, you are the heir to the throne, this is what you were born with, why do you need to fight endlessly with the princes? There is no harm in looking at the world, the people's livelihood, this is the breadth of mind of an emperor. This subject thinks. His Majesty may be using this to train you. The foreign forces are powerful, they can help your Highness now, but in the future they will be a hindrance. The crown prince's brows furrowed, showing some anger. Nianyang, do you know what you are saying? Sowing discord between him and his mother's family. Nianyang said, I know very well. The crown prince said, then you still dare to say it. Nianyang said, there are some things that I know should not be said, but I still have to say them. This subject serves the emperor wholeheartedly, you are the legitimate heir, naturally I have to plan for you. The crown prince choked, but he could not deny that Nianyang's words swept away the anxiety of recent years, calming his heart. I don't know why. The crown prince looked deeply at Nianyang. This solitude has a feeling that you seem to be looking at someone. Nianyang's smile became more difficult, and he said awkwardly, this subject will say something offensive, this subject has a cousin, he is also called Ching. Last year at the Jasper Forest banquet, this subject heard your highness's name and couldn't help it. Thus, this subject feels especially close to your highness, please forgive me, your highness. The crown prince did not expect this reason, and raised a hand to help Nianyang, who was bowing in apology, up. It's not a big deal, the crown prince said, where is your cousin now? Nianyang said, this subject made a mistake, and my cousin unfortunately died young. Before he died, he said to this subject, our friendship is severed, and we will not meet again on the road to the Yellow Springs. The crown prince was not angry at being offended, but rather curious what Nianyang had done to make his cousin say such harsh words. No, it is not my cousin's fault. Although this subject has a clear conscience, to my cousin, this is indeed an unforgivable crime. Zhong-yi is like a woman, crying just like that. Probably because the matter had been explained, the crown prince's attitude towards Nianyang became much gentler. Nianyang was shocked to find that he had unknowingly shed tears, and he immediately felt somewhat embarrassed. Actually, I will not hide it from Zhong-yi, when this solitude first saw Zhong-yi, there was a faint sense of familiarity. When Nianyang heard this, his eyes widened in shock. Regardless of whether this crown prince was speaking the truth or not, Nianyang decided to bet all his chips on him. As the emperor grew older, the fight for the throne became more and more serious, and Nianyang took advantage of this demonic wind to soar. His official career was smooth, and the speed of his promotion was as fast as a rocket. At a young age, he sat in the position of Yuanfu, the head of the civil officials. Although his relationship with the crown prince was good, it was limited to a personal relationship. When it came to politics, they still fought. The civil and military officials were confused by this. The crown prince's presence was still very low, and his position seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but the old emperor did not show any intention of removing him. He was not anxious, but the four older princes were. Nianyang smiled coldly as he watched on. He had secretly schemed, causing the first prince, who had military power, to repeatedly make stupid moves, framing, well, it could not be said to be framing. The first prince did have the intention of forcing the emperor to abdicate, but Nianyang had just materialized his thoughts and put them into practice. When the second prince supervised the imperial examinations, Nianyang had exposed a huge case of cheating in the examination that year, and successfully removed him from the imperial examinations. The third prince was the son of the imperial concubine, so he had some influence in the imperial harem and the court. Nianyang had started with the imperial concubine's mother's family. In this world, there were only stains that had not been found, and there were no clean, and dignified nobles. The fourth prince was even simpler. Nianyang himself was an Oscar winner, so how could he not see that the fourth prince, who seemed uncompetitive, was actually very scheming? Nianyang would not be merciful to his own kind. In just a few years, he had defeated all the princes. He had eliminated his political enemies at the front, and the crown prince, Nianyang, had taken care of things for him from behind, so that the old emperor would not find out. After 2 years, the old emperor abdicated as the crown prince. The court was shaken, and Nianyang was stunned. On the eve of his ascension to the throne, the old emperor had looked at him meaningfully, but the crown prince had asked Nianyang if he had any plans for the future. Nianyang thought for a long time. First, I will be a powerful official. Second, I will block my cousin on the road to the Yellow Springs. He said that we would not meet again on the road to the Yellow Springs, but I insist on seeing him. Nianyang looked into the crown prince's eyes and said lightly, whether he admits it or not, I have repaid what I owe him. The crown prince laughed involuntarily. What if he doesn't admit it? Chapter 1660. Lu Xing might have known what Enchui was thinking. However, what could he do even if he knew? Lu Xing was a hot-tempered and arrogant man. He would not lower his bottom line just to please Enchui, even if Enchui was his lord. It wasn't that he didn't know why his relationship with Enchui had become so stiff, and it wasn't that he didn't have a way to fix it. The reason why he hadn't taken any action was because he knew very well that the crux of the problem between him and Enchui was that they had different ideals. There was no solution to this problem. Unless Enchui was fundamentally changed or Lvijing abandoned himself, he and Enchui were destined to walk in opposite directions. For many people, in order to climb up, they could give up anything. Lu Xing also wanted to stand out, but if the price was his bottom line, he would not agree. Thus, the current situation was more or less because Lu Xing had no choice but to go with the flow. No matter how much Lu Xing cursed his lord in his mind, he still had to do what he had to do. Ever since Enchui had brought troops to support the front line, the expansion speed of Jiang Pingji's troops had been greatly curbed. After half a month of small-scale confrontations, the troops of both sides were in a stalemate. They were like fire and water, and it looked like an ultimate war was about to break out. Foster father, how could Lord Enchui treat you like this? Kong Shintong was like a trapped beast, pacing back and forth in the tent. She stomped her feet twice as if she was venting her anger, her eyes wide open. Have you finished reciting today's copy of the Analects of Confucius? What are you angry about? Lu Xing had lost a lot of weight these days. There were piles of bamboo slips and official documents on his desk. He rarely had the time to look up at his indignant adopted daughter. He put down his brush, rubbed his wrist, and sighed. Sit down. Don't walk back and forth in the tent. You're making foster father dizzy. Don't be angry, your little mouth is so angry that you can hang a wine cup on it. How could Kong Shintong endure this? She had been staying in Lu Zhang's tent for the past few days. Even if she were to leave, she would bring guards with her to protect herself. Come here and help me tidy up these bamboo slips. Sort them out and tidy them up. Lu Xing waved at Kong Shintong, trying to persuade his adopted daughter not to get angry so easily. There was really no need to be calculative with Enchui. Kong Shintong was about to cry from anger. She hadn't come to the front line, so she didn't know that her foster father was in such a bad situation. Enchui, that pig trotter, was a complete scumbag. Did he really think that his godfather was a brick, moving wherever he was needed? The enemy's momentum was fierce, but it was only thanks to Yifu's ingenious plan and the arrangement of the troops that they managed to stabilize the situation, breaking the enemy's momentum and stopping their advance. As soon as the battle formation was stabilized, Enchui could not wait to throw Lu Xing, who was supervising the battle, to the rear to deal with trivial matters. There were so many matters that Lu Xing had to stay up all night to fight. Kong Shintong could not see anything else. She could only see that Enchui had shamelessly taken credit and glory from his subjects. What a shameless pig trotter. Kong Shintong watched as her foster father lost weight. Even if he was busy, he still grabbed hold of her studies and answered her questions. How could she not be touched? His adoptive father was such a good man, so why wasn't Chui so guarded against him? Didn't Chui really think that his foster father couldn't be anyone else but him? Godfather, your daughter is coming. Kang Shintong was about to say something, but she forcefully held back her words and obediently helped Lu Jing share his burden. After busying herself for a while and clearing away some of the bamboo slips that had piled up like a mountain on the table, Lu Jing heaved a sigh of relief. He had the time to discipline his foster daughter. This is a military camp, and there are openings in all directions. Remember to be careful with your words and actions, lest the Lord hears what you shouldn't say. Lu Jing lectured his foster daughter with a stern expression. Kang Shintong hung her head dejectedly and obediently complied. Lu Jing said, "Actually, it's fine if I'm not at the front of the battle formation. There are many talents in the Lord's camp. Naturally, he can stabilize the situation." Kang Shintong said, "You're kind. You're still covering up for them at this time." She had seen how good Lu Jing was. In her heart, apart from her idol, Jiang Pingji, Lu Jing was the best. The outcome of the battle isn't something that can be decided by one person. At most, I've prevented them from being schemed against by the enemy, but you can't say that this is all my credit. Speaking up to this point, Lu Jing paused and added, "Moreover, Lu Shi is yet to appear at the front of the battle formation." Kang Shintong's gaze was filled with doubt. This fellow Lu Shi. There are few who are better at fighting than him, and there are few who are smarter than him. Based on his past experiences, wherever there's a war to fight, he'll be there. Lu Jing muttered, looking at the enemies everywhere. Zhongzhao has basically been defeated. Other than the Lord's Nanxing, he has no other battlefield to join in the fun. The two armies have been at war for more than a month, but there's no trace of him in the various battlefields. It's really strange. In the past, Jiang Pingji was too active. Now that she was suddenly as quiet as a chicken, Lu Jing felt uneasy. Foster father, you mean? Kang Shintong thought that her foster father would say something groundbreaking, but unexpectedly, either he's injured or he's pregnant. However, it's not the first time that Lu Shi has pretended to be sick to deceive people. He's so good at fighting, so it's ridiculous that he's injured or sick. On the contrary, the probability of him being pregnant is higher. Otherwise, I really can't think of why he hasn't appeared at the front of the battle formation. Kang Shintong was speechless. A normal lord wouldn't run to the front to fight with the enemy, right? Besides, why is the probability of him being pregnant higher than being injured? Can't he not appear at the front because he wants to be a good lord? Perhaps, there's another plot. For example, to divert attention and sneak attack our army after deceiving everyone. Lu Jing couldn't help but roll his eyes. The terrain here is open and flat. If there's a sneak attack, his tracks will be exposed before he even gets close. He'll become a hedgehog. No matter what, Lu Jing was from Langyi Academy. He was one of Master Yuanjing's disciples. His foundation was solid, and his knowledge of setting up a camp was perfect. When he chose to set up camp here, he naturally considered the possibility of the enemy launching a sneak attack. Kang Shintong responded with an "oh," and faintly heard Lu Jing muttering in a low voice. Something's wrong. How can he be peaceful? Kang Shintong said, "Foster father, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." "If you don't want to say it, then don't." Lu Jing imitated Jiang Pingji's words. Seeing Kang Shintong's face turn red and her anxious and flustered appearance, he couldn't help but curse Jiang Pingji for leading him astray. He changed his words and said, "I'm just teasing you. Just say what you want to say. Don't hide it." Kang Shintong took a deep breath. "Foster father. Since you're close to the Duke of Lanting, and Lord Enchui treats you so poorly, why do you have to do this? Why don't you make use of our friendship as classmates and make contributions? No matter what, the Duke of Lanting will think highly of you. Lu Zheng's face turned cold, but he didn't get angry, and he didn't reprimand her. He just said with a cold face, compared to Fang Ji, you seem more like a lobbyist sent by Lu Shi. Whose foster daughter are you? Chapter 1661. Kang Shintong lowered her head timidly. There's no room for discussion. You're still young and don't understand. It's late, go and rest. Lu Jing ordered for her to be driven away. Kang Shintong knew she had said something wrong and looked nervous and afraid. She bit her lower lip so hard that a mark appeared. Here, godfather, sleep early too. Don't tire yourself out. Kang Shintong retreated. Lu Zheng stared at the candlelight in a daze. This child is still too young, Lu Zheng sighed softly as if he was lamenting. If Kang Shintong had been calmer, she would have realized that Lu Zheng didn't despise her for saying such treacherous words. He didn't even reprimand her. It could be seen that Lu Zheng wasn't completely loyal to Enchui. He even had many complaints. Just as Lu Zheng had said, Kang Shintong was too young. Her thoughts were all natural and didn't know the twists and turns. Lu Zheng's personality determined that he wasn't someone who would surrender without a fight. Flattery was better than death. It was the same even if Enchui was a pig. After this conversation, Lu Zheng was no different than usual. Kang Shintong, on the other hand, felt guilty and regretful. She had been too impulsive. Even though it was for her godfather's good, he had assisted Enchui for so long. He couldn't just give up. Kang Shintong was regretting when a loud horn sounded outside the tent. The drums were beating like thunder, causing the sand on the ground to tremble. Her heart tightened. She secretly opened the tent's curtain and looked outside. Although she couldn't see anything from here, she could feel a murderous aura choking her throat and preventing her from breathing as she looked at the much emptier military camp and the sound of the war drums coming from afar. Kang Shintong looked at the hurried figures and murmured softly. There's another battle. Is Godfather all right? The battle had lasted from dawn to dusk. During this time, many wounded soldiers had been carried back from outside. Some of the wounded soldiers were bathed in blood and looked like blood people. Their original appearance could not be seen. Some of them had broken limbs and wreckage, and their human forms could not be seen. All of them were in so much pain that they wanted to die. Moans of pain flowed from the corners of their lips. Almost none of them had their arms or legs intact. Their bodies were covered in wounds. If she wasn't still alive, Kang Shintong would have suspected that she had come to the underworld. Kang Shintong obeyed Lu Zheng's warning and did not dare to run around. Every time the battle started, she would hide in her tent. While his heart was beating like a drum, he listened to the movements outside. Even though Jiang Pingji was her idol, she knew that once Enchui was defeated, the military camp would be in danger. Not only would she be in danger, but her godfather would also meet with misfortune. Therefore, every time there was a war, she would worry for a long time, from the moment the war drums sounded until the gong sounded to retreat. He was worried that Jiang Pingji would lose and that his foster father would be in danger. She asked someone to leave some food for Lvijing. She cooked a small stove to keep him warm so that he could eat hot food as soon as he came back. Perhaps it was because the enemy's offensive had become much fiercer and the war was in a tight situation. Lu Jing did not deal with his chores for the past 2 days. He was summoned by Enchui for a meeting before dawn and did not return even when the moon was high in the sky. Not knowing how the battle situation was, Kang Shintong yawned next to the small stove. When she woke up, she did not see Lu Jing return. Could it be that we've lost today? Kang Shintong recalled the number of wounded soldiers she saw during the day. The number was indeed greater than the previous few times, and it looked even more tragic. She hugged her knees and waited for a while. Finally, she heard familiar footsteps coming from outside the tent. Kong Shintong was energized and her sleepiness disappeared completely. "Godfather!" she called out. The tent flap was lifted. With the help of a few candles in the tent, she could barely see who it was. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Lu Zheng was slightly stunned. Kong Shintong had already stepped forward to welcome him. He subconsciously took a step back, but it was still too late. Kong Shintong smelled the scent of blood on his body and her expression changed drastically. Kong Shintong asked hurriedly, "Is Godfather injured?" Lu Xing raised his hand to cover his left arm and shook his head. "Swords have no eyes in front of a battle. It's inevitable that he will be injured." Kong Shintong said, "Godfather is the military supervisor. He's in the middle of the army. How can he be injured so easily? Unless the formation of the three armies was broken by the enemy and the enemy rushed into their own formation, it was possible that Lu Xing, who was heavily protected, would be accidentally injured." Lu Zheng's brows showed some fatigue. He said, "Today's battle situation is not optimistic. The enemy's combat power is extremely strong, while our army," he wanted to say something but stopped. In terms of the number of troops in the three armies, Enchanting undoubtedly had a great advantage. They were almost twice as many as the enemy. But, in terms of overall combat quality, the elites under Jiang Pingji's command obeyed orders strictly. Their ability to carry out battles was extremely strong, and the combat power they displayed was naturally tyrannical. Even without Jiang Pingji, who was a bug in the game, charging and killing at the front, they gradually suppressed Enchanting's arrogance. Lu Xing had seen countless storms and waves, but he had never wanted to curse like he did today. Look at the enemy's combat quality, look at his own people's ability to carry out their tasks. The troops under Jiang Pingji's command used their actions to tell Enchanting that numbers didn't mean everything. Their quality was inferior to the enemy's, and Enchanting had recruited so many ordinary young men in such a short period of time who were waving flags and shouting battle cries. They had forcefully lowered the overall quality of the troops. Over the past few days, Lu Zheng had tasted what it meant to be powerless. He almost couldn't suppress his negative emotions. In his mind, he had several formations to deal with the enemy. He cooperated with the chief commander to issue military orders, but the effect was far from what he had expected. It was as if his brain was active and he tried to control his body to counterattack and defend against the enemy, but his limbs wouldn't listen to him. He was either paralyzed and stiff, or he was flailing about. He could only watch helplessly as the enemy's raised blade pierced into his body. Lu Xing had returned so late that day, not only because he was injured, but more importantly, because Enchanting had made him stay behind and reprimanded him. Everyone knew what the crux of the matter was, but no one stood up for Lu Xing. They didn't dare to say it. What did they say? That the overall combat power of the army wasn't strong because the quality of the troops that Enchanting had forcibly recruited was too weak. Not only did they not increase their combat power, but they were also holding them back. If they said that, it would be tantamount to questioning Enchanting's decision and ability. No one wanted to commit a crime when Enchanting was furious. Lu Xing became the scapegoat. Of course, Enchanting still had a sense of propriety. Although he said it was a reprimand, he actually didn't say anything harsh. After all, his trusted aide and right-hand man, Hua Yuan, wasn't here. He still needed to rely on Lu Xing now. He couldn't completely offend him and disappoint him. Kong Shintong was silent. She only brought the warm food to Lu Xing, hoping that he would eat a little. "I'm afraid that in this battle. I'll try my best to help you settle down." Jiang Pingji still didn't participate in the battle, but the army led by Fu Wang was assisted by a few famous strategists. Lu Xing was surrounded by useless teammates. He had the heart but not the strength. Before the situation worsened, he planned to first find a way out for Kong Shintong and ensure her safety. "I'm not going anywhere." Kong Shintong refused resolutely. Lu Jing ate in silence, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Without waiting for Lu Jing to come up with a plan, bad news arrived 2 days later. It shocked the entire army and made them anxious and uneasy. 200,000 dawn of rations had been stolen. And Chui was so angry that his entire body trembled. He killed the general who was responsible for escorting the rations. In his heart, he even cursed 18 generations of Jiang Pingji's ancestors. Lu Jing frowned slightly. Jiang Pingji, who had been in seclusion for 2 months, had appeared. She seized 200,000 dawn of rations in one move. Lu Jing sighed and said, "It's really her style. It was fine if she didn't move, but once she did, she would kill." In response, Jiang Pingji expressed her apology. "Me." Chapter 1662. Your Highness. Your Highness, please spare me. I'm really wronged. Lu Jing had received the news that the rations had been robbed and hurried over, just in time to see 2 soldiers dragging the tied-up general out to be dealt with according to military law. The general knew he was going to die, but he refused to give up hope of survival. Seeing Lu Zheng's figure from the corner of his eye, he hurriedly straightened his neck and shouted, "Military counselor! Military counselor! I'm wronged. I've been diligent in supervising the rations. I've never betrayed my lord." Hearing him shout, Lu Zheng's feet paused, his wooden clogs making a muffled sound on the gravel. The general struggled and said, "It's not my fault that the rations were leaked. Military counselor, save me. I'm really wronged. The rations were fake. They were switched long ago. I'm wronged. Military counselor, save me." Lu Jing regained his composure after just one breath. He lifted the curtain of the main tent and bent over to enter. He was late. The tent was already filled with people, but many of them had grave expressions and didn't even notice his arrival. And Chui had just ordered the execution of the general and was still angry. Seeing that Lu Zheng was late, he was even more displeased. He hadn't expected Lu Zheng's tent to be set up so far away from the commander's tent. Even if Lu Zheng had jogged all the way here, he wouldn't have arrived so quickly. Of course, as a qualified scumbag, and Chui wouldn't find fault with himself. Ordering people he didn't like to come and go at his beck and call was the typical behavior of a scumbag. When there was nothing to do, he ignored Lu Zheng. When there was something to do, he spoke intimately. He suppressed his displeasure and asked for a solution in a low voice. His eyes seemed to flow with pure trust. Lu Zheng had long been used to Chui's behavior. While sighing that his lord was a drama queen and every inch of her was an actor, he bowed in shame and said, "I heard about the rations being robbed and rushed here. I didn't have time to understand the details," and Chui choked, feeling even more suffocated. Seeing that Chui had nothing to say, Lu Jing turned his head to ask the others what had happened. And Chui silently swallowed the roiling scolding in his throat. He suppressed his irritation and waited for Lu Jing to understand what had happened. 200,000 dawn of rations was not a small number, and it was also related to the army's consumption for a while, so the troops guarding the rations naturally did not dare to slack off. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they still failed to defend against the enemy. When the grain transport army was about to arrive, they were robbed by the enemy. Everyone thought that it was Jiang Pingji's masterpiece with her execution ability. Jiang Pingji's status rose along with the tide. The things she had done were studied under a magnifying glass and analyzed over and over again. As her enemies, and Chui and the others naturally knew how many things this fiend had done that made people tremble in fear just by hearing her name. After the analysis, they unanimously threw the blame to her. Little did they know that after Jiang Pingji turned over a new leaf, she did not roam the front lines anymore, let alone bring people to rob rations. It was true that the people under her command had robbed the rations, but she was not the one who had benefited from the rations. Lu Zheng was keenly aware that something was wrong. He furrowed his brows and asked the people around him. After a while, he said to Enchui, "My lord, there are still doubtful points in this matter. I sincerely ask my lord to retract your order and spare General Chai's life for now." Enchui almost fainted from anger. He could not suppress his temper and reprimanded Lu Zheng for having ulterior motives in front of everyone. General Chai, whom Lu Zheng had accused of collaborating with the enemy and betraying his lord, should be killed if not this kind of person. Kill Lu Zheng. And Shui did not expect Lu Zheng to plead for mercy on General Chai's behalf. He was even more furious. "I sincerely ask my lord to listen to me. There are many doubtful points in this matter. My lord should treat it with caution." Lu Zheng looked like he was going by the book. His tone was indifferent. "The matter of the rations is a secret of our army. How did the enemy know so much about it and catch General Chai off guard?" And Shui laughed coldly and asked in return, "This person even has a letter of collaboration with the enemy and betrayal of his lord. How do you think Lu Shi knows so much about it?" The enemy could tell at a glance that this had been planned for a long time. There must have been an insider who leaked information to them. Who else could it be other than General Chai, who had irrefutable evidence? He really did not know what was wrong with such a stupid question. Lu Jing said, "In that case, after the rations were stolen, why didn't he take the opportunity to be captured by Lu Shi and escape from his predicament? Instead, he led an army to break out of the encirclement and pass the news to my lord, causing him to be killed in the end. Also, General Chai said that the rations were fake. What's going on?" And Shui said angrily, "It's just a traitor's way of survival and framing others." Lu Jing did not think so. When the enemy had launched a sneak attack, General Chai had tried his best to protect the rations. However, the enemy had the advantage of time, place, and people. They had suddenly attacked and caught everyone off guard. With a ferocious move, the soldiers guarding the rations had been beaten senseless. General Chai had tried his best to delay the enemy but to no avail. In the end, he had no choice but to burn all the rations. They could not use them, and the rations could not fall into the enemy's hands. In the end, the rations on the top were normal, but the rations on the bottom were disguised. They did not contain rations at all. When General Chai discovered this, he was completely stunned. This was far more terrifying than an enemy's sneak attack. And Shui wanted to kill him, so he revealed this matter. In the end, no one believed him. Framing others. Framing who? Lu Jing said in a low voice. No matter how protective the Lord is, he should not be biased at a time like this. The person in charge of the rations was Hua Yuan. If the rations Hua Yuan had prepared were real, then General Chai was the liar. On the other hand, this problematic batch of rations had been prepared by Hua Yuan. Perhaps the one who leaked the details of the rations and attracted the enemy's precise attack was Hua Yuan. After some maneuvering, this batch of 200,000 don of rations was rightfully taken by Hua Yuan. Of course, Enchui was not the only one who did not believe this. The others did not believe it either. What would Hua Yuan gain by doing this? They did not know, but Lu Jing did. That madman's inner core was Lu Shi. What did he gain by seizing the rations and heartlessly betraying his teammates? This monster was preparing to ascend to the heavens. Of course, even if Lu Jing told the others that Hua Yuan's essence had been divided into Lu Shi, no one would believe him. Instead, they would think that he was using clumsy and underhanded methods to suppress Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng could not be bothered with this thankless task. Do whatever you want. He had lost all hope in his teammates. And Shui was so angry that he was about to ascend to the heavens. What did Lu Zheng mean by this? Was he reprimanding him for being biased in front of everyone? They did not know that Jiang Pingji was also very angry. The anger levels of the two feudal lords had reached a delicate balance. Jiang Pingji looked at the rations that Li Yun had snatched back, and her face darkened. Lu Xiaoyin has eaten a lot of pig's brains over the years. His brain is quite nourished. He even schemed against me. She gritted her teeth so hard that they made a ringing sound. The rations that she had spent so much effort to steal were actually fake. Her efforts had become a joke. After thinking about it, she locked her target on Lu Zheng. After all, this kind of underhanded plotting was indeed like him. No matter how big her brain was, she could not have guessed that Enchui's official, Hua Yuan's essence, had created a Lu Shi and was secretly preparing to cause trouble. The real mastermind, Hua Yuan, stared coldly at the small porcelain bottle in his hand and smiled. What is this? The Xichang Emperor's concubine asked anxiously. Hua Yuan said, poison. The Xichang Emperor's concubine stuck out her belly and trembled. She asked fearfully, to whom? Hua Yuan laughed. Guess. The Emperor's concubine was speechless. Chapter 1663. This poison is for Enchui. The Xicheng Emperor's concubine knew that Hua Yuan was ambitious, but she didn't expect him to be so decisive. He actually wanted to poison Enchui. No matter how bad Enchui was, his trust in Hua Yuan and importance to him was unquestionable. He even valued Hua Yuan and neglected Lu Zheng. Now, Hua Yuan wanted Hua Yuan dead for some unknown reason. The Xichang Emperor's concubine shuddered at the thought of it. On second thought, Hua Yuan had forced her to do something even more disgusting. It didn't seem out of line for this person to have the ambition to kill her lord. Hua Yuan glanced at the Xichang Emperor's concubine, his thin lips curving into a smile. The golden light shone on his face, forming a faint halo. He looked like a god. Xichang's emperor concubine felt even more complicated when she saw this. Heaven had given Hua Yuan an outstanding appearance, an elegant demeanor, and even extraordinary intelligence. Yet, such a beautiful appearance hid such filth and filth. One could not help but sigh. As the Xichang Emperor's concubine's thoughts ran wild, she heard Hua Yuan's calm reply. Why would the side lady think that I want to poison my lord to death? My lord has treated me well. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. The Xichang Emperor's concubine choked. Her face contorted. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. The spring he mentioned was secretly transplanting a large patch of green grassland on his lord's head. Not only did he transplant the grassland, but he also manipulated it in secret. He relied on Enchui's trust to tamper with the rations. She wasn't wrong. The rations that Li Yun had gone through so much trouble to rob had been intentionally given away by Hua Yuan. Only 10% of the rations were real. The other 90% were fake. Hua Yuan had secretly leaked information to lure the enemy over to rob the rations. Jiang Pingji had taken the bait and sent people to rob the rations. The 200,000 don of provisions were easily taken away by the enemy. Through this method, Hua Yuan managed to keep this batch of rations for himself in a justifiable manner. The Xichang Emperor's concubine and the prince felt uneasy. Hua Yuan's methods were so vicious and swift. Could they really gain even the slightest bit of advantage from him? The Empress concubine did her best to suppress the fear, worry, and fear in her heart, and forced out an extremely stiff smile. Hua Yuan had secretly embezzled a huge amount of rations and didn't even care about the lives and deaths of the frontline soldiers. Even a 3-year-old child wouldn't believe that he didn't have the intention to rebel. How could I not believe Sir's words? I misunderstood you just now. Although Emperor concubine Xichang said that, no one knew what she was thinking. I'm stupid. I hope you can give me some pointers so that I can understand. You don't know, but the Lord has been looking forward to the child in your womb for a long time. Hua Yuan stretched out his hand and used the back of his finger to caress Xichang's imperial concubine's protruding belly. The imperial concubine was so frightened by his actions that her entire body stiffened. She did not dare to move. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her slender body trembled slightly. It was as if Hua Yuan was not using his finger but a sword to threaten her. Finally, when she realized that Hua Yuan hadn't harmed her, she heaved a long sigh of relief. She faintly felt as if she had escaped from death. But Sir knows this child isn't. Hua Yuan retracted his hand and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe his fingers. His movements were reserved and elegant, as if there was really something dirty on it. The Lord doesn't know, does he? He said indifferently. He doesn't know. The child you bear is his flesh and blood. Emperor concubine shut her mouth because she realized that Hua Yuan's eyes were flashing with murderous intent. If she said one more thing that she didn't dare to say, she didn't doubt that the poison in Hua Yuan's hands would enter her mouth. As if he was murmuring carelessly, Hua Yuan said, if only this child was a son. The Lord would have a successor. Emperor concubine forced a smile. Even if it's a son, he's just a bastard son. Lang Jun still has a legitimate young master. Because Enchui's body was damaged, he could no longer impregnate women. In order to appease the officials who followed him, he adopted a son from a branch family. After many years, this young master had long been recognized by the officials. Everyone treated him as Enchui's successor. Even if Emperor concubine Xichang gave birth to Enchui's biological son, he would only be a bastard son. He wouldn't be able to compete with the adopted son and nominal son of the legitimate wife. When her child grew up, who knew if Enchui would still be alive? After all, there was a lunatic like Hua Yuan on the inside and Jiang Pingji on the outside. Enchui was sandwiched between them. No matter how you looked at it, he seemed like a short-lived creature. Even if Jiang Pingji didn't kill Enchui, the young master would have grown up after many years. How could a young child be able to compete with him? Unless... Emperor concubine Xichang's mind spun. An extremely daring idea suddenly popped into her mind. Could it be? Her eyes widened and she took half a step back in fright. If the poison in Hua Yuan's hands wasn't prepared for Enchui, then it was prepared for the young master. If the young master died, Enchui would stay at the front lines and be controlled by Hua Yuan. Wouldn't his life and death be at Hua Yuan's disposal? As long as the two of them died, the child in her womb could only be used as a bargaining chip for Hua Yuan to seize power. As expected, Hua Yuan said, "Young master." Sighed Madam, "The Lord values the child in your womb more. He has long had the intention to abolish Li. Yes, this is indeed the Lord's intention. The young master is a stumbling block for the child in the Sighed Madam's womb. A stumbling block naturally had to be kicked out." Emperor concubine Xichang felt a chill in her heart. She didn't doubt Enchui's ruthlessness. His intention to abolish Li was probably true, but whether it was Enchui's idea or Hua Yuan's own decision to poison the young master was debatable. Enchui was shameless, but he wasn't brainless. He favored his biological son, but before his biological son grew up, he wouldn't kick out his backup stepson early. An unborn child, no one knew how talented he was and whether he could grow up safely. In summary, this was most likely Hua Yuan's own intention. How can a woman like me understand these things? Everything will be decided by the master. Hua Yuan laughed. That won't do. I'll need a little help from the side, madam. Emperor concubine Shicheng's eyelids twitched violently. What kind of help? Hua Yuan leaned forward and whispered a few words into her ear. Emperor concubine's body trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with shock and fear. "Yes, sir, this matter." Her lips trembled and she wanted to refuse, but when she saw Hua Yuan's half-smiling eyes and the murderous intent deep in them, she had no choice but to give in. Everything will be arranged by the master." Emperor concubine held her stomach with one hand and lowered her head. Hatred and indignation that could topple mountains and overturn seas rose in her heart. It was too unbearable and humiliating to be at someone's mercy. A conspiracy quietly took shape. 2 days later, a spring rain came. The mountain mist was thick and light, and the air was filled with the fragrance of soil and spring rain. The faint sound of horse hooves approached from afar. Chapter 1664. It's a pity that you didn't come hunting today. The weather had been good these days, so the youth had asked Hua Yuan out to hunt with him. However, Hua Yuan had been troubled by the looting of rations and could only decline the youth's invitation. The youth was disappointed, but he also understood that business was more important. He didn't dare to act recklessly. Ever since Enchui's side wife had gotten pregnant, the youth could clearly feel that his father treated him differently. For example, during this war, as the heir who was about to reach adulthood, he had been left behind. It was said to be for protection, but honestly, did he need such protection in troubled times? A few years ago, the youth had gone to Dongqing with his master, Hua Yuan, to seek an alliance. At that time, there was no mention of protection. Why did Enchui suddenly say protection when he was about to reach adulthood? On the surface, it was protection, but in reality, it was weakening the relationship between the youth and Enchui's subjects. The youth wasn't stupid. He naturally realized it. However, he couldn't tell anyone about it. He could only suppress it in his heart. As an idler, and also to show his father how harmless he was, he had been addicted to hunting and pleasure. His master, Hua Yuan, had even lectured him seriously. Don't be addicted to pleasure and neglect your studies and government affairs. The youth could only smile bitterly. He didn't dare look up at Hua Yuan's disappointed eyes. He hadn't grown his wings yet and could only rely on Enchui. Even a sneeze from Enchui made his heart jump and his thoughts run wild. The only fortunate thing was that his master, Hua Yuan, was the only person who had maintained a normal attitude toward him after the incident. Because they were rare, they were precious. The youth saw how Hua Yuan treated him, so he naturally trusted and respected him even more. He looked at the prey hanging from the horse's back and seemed to think of something. The corners of his lips curled involuntarily, and his eyes curved into 2 crescent moons. His clear eyes were filled with a smile. He was very good-looking. Even though he still looked a little young, his bearing had already been developed. Anyone who saw such an outstanding youth in the wilderness would probably think that they had seen a beautiful spirit. I'm lucky today. This wasn't a good season for hunting. The prey had just survived winter and were skinny, not as plump as they were in autumn. However, the prey today were all good. Their fur was smooth and beautiful. The youth planned to pick the best and give it to Hua Yuan. The servant who served the youth cursed his bad luck. He mumbled, "How is it good luck? We've been completely drenched." The youth looked up at the rainwater dripping down from the eaves, brushing the moss green. Although the weather was not beautiful at this time, it did not affect the youth's bright mood. He said with a smile, "It's raining and we've already come across a wooden hut. Isn't that good? When hunters went hunting in the mountains, those who were lucky could go and return on the same day. Those who were unlucky had to wait patiently in the mountains for a few days. For the sake of convenience, they would build this kind of temporary shelter, and passers-by could also rest here. The young man was in a good mood and did not feel that the rain was inappropriate. The attendant untied the wineskin from the back of the horse and handed it to the youth with both hands. "Young master, drink some wine to warm up your body, lest you catch a cold." The rain came suddenly. Even though everyone found shelter as fast as they could, they were still wet. Their clothes and hair were wet. The young man was of high status. If he fell sick because his attendants did not take good care of him, the attendants accompanying him would be in trouble. The attendant saw the young man take the wineskin and gulp it down. Only then did he feel relieved and turn around to fetch a clean set of clothes. Although the wooden hut was small, it had all the essentials. There was also a lot of dry firewood in the house, just enough to make a fire and boil water for the young man to bathe. The young man waved his hand and said, "Put the clothes aside. I'll change later. I don't want to move now." "Yes." The attendant put the clothes where the young man could reach out his hand and respectfully stepped back to guard nearby. He did not know whether it was because his alcohol tolerance was too poor, or because the wine today was especially fragrant, but the young man finished the wineskin in a few mouthfuls. His white jade-like cheeks were slightly tipsy, and the drunkenness rushed to his head. Not long after, his white jade-like cheeks were covered with a thin layer of red, and his whole body exuded the unique youthful spirit of a young man. He did not care at first, but soon noticed something strange. A familiar yet strange hot wave spread from inside to outside, making his skin hot and red. He could not help but raise his hand to loosen his clothes to cool down. This feeling, the young man was a little angry. "What's with this wine?" The attendant heard the commotion and rushed over. Hearing the young man's question, he was shocked. "Young master, wasn't this wine given by Master Huayuan?" The young man suddenly remembered something, and his expression became slightly unnatural. It turned out that this wine was found by the young man's concubine from somewhere and given to the young man. The young man knew that it was rare wine, so he gave it to Huayuan. Huayuan had been busy with the military rations recently and had not rested for several days. He was not in the mood to taste the wine, so he asked the young man to pack most of the wine back. In other words, this problematic wine should have been done by the young man's concubine. Thinking of this, the young man's cheeks burned like a burning cloud. He was ashamed, angry, and hateful. The women in the inner residence would really do anything to be favored. Fortunately, the teacher did not drink it. If he did, he might make a fool of himself. The young man's face turned pale, then green, then purple, and finally black. The attendant was a very discerning person. He did not know what had happened, but it did not prevent him from taking the opportunity to flatter the young man. He said flatteringly, "I see that the young master looks tired. Why don't you go in and rest?" The young man felt uncomfortable, but he nodded in agreement. Just as he was about to get up, his body suddenly froze on the spot. He did not know whether he should get up or not. It was very awkward. He had been dreaming since he was 13. 2 years ago, his father and Chui had prepared 2 intelligent and beautiful concubines for him to learn about human relationships. With these experiences, he naturally knew what the changes in his body meant. He immediately became even more embarrassed. He unnaturally tightened his legs. However, he was dressed more professionally today, so the reaction under his abdomen was slightly more obvious. The attendant's sharp eyes saw the small tent under his abdomen and understood. The young man was extremely embarrassed. He ran into the farmhouse as if he was escaping and slammed the door shut. This kind of farmhouse was a place for hunters to rest. The environment was simple, but it could shelter them from the wind and rain. There were guards outside, so ordinary hunters could not enter. The young man glanced at his abdomen, and his face became even more ashen. The attendant was a clever person. He asked in a low voice, "Young master, do you want to call for someone?" "We'll see. There's no need for now," the young man replied in a hoarse voice. Even his breath was hot. The accompanying attendants were all men in their teens or 20s. There were no women. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.